The dog who heard what machines missed. No one at the airport noticed the child's trembling hands. No one saw the way she shrank into herself, small and silent. No scanner, camera, or trained eye caught what was hidden in her body, or her eyes. But one dog did. Aegis wasn't meant to be anything more than a scent tracker, a tool on 4 legs. That's what the paperwork said. But Claire knew better. She had seen what others hadn't. She'd seen how he stood still when others barked, how his ears moved before his body, how he understood what people couldn't say. And that day, when a girl named Emery stepped off gate 17 with a secret sealed in fear, it wasn't any machine that stopped the unthinkable. It was a German shepherd who leaned forward, caught something in the air no one else could smell, and refused to sit down. This is the story of what happened after, and why Claire never forgot the look in Aegis's eyes when the world told him he was wrong. Evergreen International Airport was a city within a city steel. Glass, voices, footsteps. On any given weekday morning, Terminal D pulsed with its own rhythm. The roll of luggage wheels over polished tile, intercom announcements lost in the clamor, tired travelers clutching coffee, families arguing over boarding passes. It was organized chaos, predictable in its noise, until a single bark shattered it. Not a yip, not a whine. This bark was deep, resonant, and so precise it seemed to cut straight through the static hum of terminal life. Conversations paused. A barista behind a coffee counter froze mid-pour. A little boy looked up from his tablet, eyes wide. Somewhere, a suitcase slipped from someone's hand and hit the ground with a dull thud. Then came the second bark, louder, sharper, like a warning wrapped in certainty. A few travelers chuckled nervously. One man near gate D14 leaned over to his wife and muttered, "Someone's pup doesn't like flying." But even he didn't smile. Something about the sound, it wasn't just loud, it was calibrated. The third bark changed everything. It was short, low, and powerful. And it was followed by a sudden, visceral growl that rolled across the floor like low thunder. 3 TSA agents near the checkpoint reached for their radios without a word. One dropped his coffee and didn't even flinch when it splashed across his boots. That was the moment the noise of Terminal D collapsed into silence. The dog didn't move. He stood like a sentinel, legs rigid, head low, muscles taut beneath a sleek coat of black and copper. The bright lettering on his harness K9 unit, Aegis, shone beneath the overhead lights. His handler, Officer Claire Donovan, had already begun moving, one hand near her belt, the other guiding her path around the cordoned area between gates, her eyes locked on the source of Aegis's agitation. A little girl 9, maybe 10, stood motionless just past the security line. Her hoodie was too big for her small frame. Her head hung low, the brim of her hood shadowing her face. She clutched a pink backpack with a smiling rainbow octopus sewn onto the front. Beside her stood a man mid-40s, glasses with thin wire frames, salt and pepper stubble. He wore khakis and a blazer, perfectly forgettable, except for his grip on the girl's wrist, too tight, too possessive. And when he saw Claire approaching, his smile snapped onto his face too quickly. "She's just afraid of dogs," he said, raising his free hand in what looked like a gesture of reassurance. "That's all. We'll just head on to our gate now." Aegis let out a bark so feral, so forceful, it echoed against the high-vaulted ceiling. Travelers instinctively stepped back. A child cried. One woman dropped to a crouch, shielding her toddler with her coat. Claire didn't raise her voice, but her words sliced through the atmosphere like a blade. "Sir, I'm going to need you both to step aside." The man's fingers dug deeper into the girl's wrist. "We're catching a flight," he said, attempting a chuckle, but it sounded hollow. His eyes flicked to the exit, then to the growing circle of security agents inching closer. Claire didn't blink. "Step aside." 3 words. Not loud, not angry, but they carried a weight like steel hidden in velvet. The man hesitated, just for a breath, but it was enough. Aegis surged forward, not attacking, but planting himself between the man and the child with a clarity of intent no human language could rival. His nose lowered toward the backpack, nostrils flaring. He took in one long, deliberate breath. Then he barked again. It was a singular sound, unrelenting, final, like the clang of a cell door shutting. Behind Claire, A TSA supervisor muttered, "Get me lockdown protocol. Now." Someone screamed. Phones came out. Others just stared, frozen in the quiet kind of horror reserved for events that start out of nowhere and spiral beyond understanding. Claire took a slow step toward the girl. Her voice shifted, softened. "Sweetheart, is that your backpack?" No answer. But the girl still trembling lifted her eyes for the first time. They found Claire's big, dark, flooded with something raw. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But the message was there, unmistakable. "Help me." Claire felt her stomach twist. Not fear, not even anger, something else older. A kind of instinct she had learned to obey, the same way she trusted Aegis's bark. It was the quiet space where gut feeling met years of training. She turned her radio mic to her shoulder and spoke calmly. "Requesting secondary screening. D4 sector. K9 alert. Isolate the area." The man opened his mouth again, another excuse ready. Another smile sharpened like a tool. But Claire raised her hand, palm toward him. He stopped. Because Aegis hadn't moved. He was still staring at the backpack, body humming with tension. The kind of focus that dogs only show when something should not be there. Somewhere beyond the gates, a plane lifted off the tarmac, a quiet roar swallowed by distance. But inside Terminal D, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. The moment Claire stepped closer, she saw it. His hand, not just holding the girl's wrist, gripping it. The tendons along his forearm tensed beneath his sleeve, and his thumb pressed so hard into her skin that her small hand blanched at the knuckles. He wasn't leading her. He was controlling her, anchoring her in place like an object. Claire's pulse ticked upward. Not racing, not yet, but calibrated, like a quiet alarm inside her chest. Aegis felt it too. Without a single word, he shifted. Aegis stepped forward, placing his body diagonally between the girl and the man, not lunging, not aggressive, but deliberate. His presence alone drew a line in the polished floor. He didn't look at the man. He didn't have to. His eyes locked on the girl's backpack, still clutched in front of her like a shield made of glitter and innocence. The man noticed the repositioning immediately. His smile faltered for a millisecond before recovering. "Look," he said, tone dripping with practiced calm. "We're just trying to make our flight. She's nervous. You know how it is with kids and dogs. They pick up on each other's energy." Claire didn't answer. She was watching the girl, now really watching her. The hoodie was too large, its sleeves covering half her hands. Her jeans were clean, slightly too long, the hems fraying where they dragged on the ground. Her backpack, pink, with bright felt tentacles and glittery zip pulls, looked like something a child might pick out during a happy Target run. But the way she held it was all wrong. Not swinging it like a carefree kid, not hugging it like a favorite toy. She gripped it like a lifeline. The girl's eyes never lifted. Not once. Not when Claire spoke, not when Aegis moved. Her body was unnaturally still not calm, but compressed, like she'd folded herself inward to disappear. Her sneakers, one slightly untied, never moved. Her chin remained tucked beneath her hood, and her shoulders, small, bony, stayed squared, in the kind of tension Claire had only ever seen in trauma survivors. This wasn't shyness, this was survival. Behind her, the crowd had begun to shift. People farther back whispered. Some stepped around the scene with wide-eyed caution. Others slowed, watching with suspicion or curiosity. An older woman clutched her rolling suitcase and mumbled, "What's wrong with that dog?" A teenage boy lifted his phone to film. A middle-aged man in a business suit scowled. "It's just a kid," he muttered, loud enough for Claire to hear. "Why's the dog freaking out?" Claire didn't turn, didn't explain. Aegis's stance said enough. He stood planted, unmoving, eyes forward, muscles taut beneath his vest, ears tilted slightly back, reading the tension, waiting for her cue. His breathing was slow but audible, a low huff through his nostrils that made the girl's hood tremble from 2 feet away. The man glanced down at Aegis again. His expression flickered just for a second into something else. Not fear, not worry, but calculation. A shift in the eyes. The micro-expression of someone trying to rework a plan. Claire had seen that look in interrogations. In suspects right before they ran. He adjusted his grip again, trying to disguise it as concern. Abby, he said softly, using the name printed on their boarding passes. It's okay, honey. The officer just wants to check your bag. Then we'll be on our way to Toronto, remember? Big hotel, room service, just like we talked about. The girl didn't nod, didn't blink. Claire caught the glance, just a flicker where the man's eyes darted toward the TSA kiosk, then the nearby hallway that led to the restrooms and service access. She noted it, filed it. She angled herself slightly to the left, positioning herself to cut off any direct escape route. You said your flight was international? Claire asked, voice even. Toronto, the man repeated. Gate D-17. We're already late. If we could just... Aegis growled. Not loud, but low. Sustained. The kind of growl that starts deep in the belly and resonates like the prelude to a storm. His fur bristled along his spine, but he didn't move. He didn't need to. The growl was a boundary, a message. Try it. I dare you. The man's lips pressed together in a flat line. Claire could see the faint pulse in his neck now, a single vein standing out like ink beneath pale skin. She touched the radio at her shoulder and didn't break eye contact. Control, this is Officer Donovan. Advise holding pattern at D gates. I'm escalating this to level 2. Requesting secondary screen and containment backup. The response came crackling back. Copy that. Secondary en route. Lockdown being issued for D quadrant. Claire took a half step closer, lowering herself slightly, not crouching, but softening her presence. She tilted her head gently toward the girl. Sweetheart, she said, you don't have to say anything. But if something's wrong, you can just nod, or shake your head, just a little if that's easier. The girl didn't move, but her fingers, those small, pale fingers barely visible beneath the hoodie sleeves, tightened around one of the backpack straps. Not defensive, not clutching to protect, but to hold it away from herself, like she didn't want to touch it. Claire's breath caught in her chest. Aegis took a single step forward, just one. His growl stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness. Ears forward, shoulders rigid. And in that moment, Claire knew. There was something in that bag. Not candy, not toys, not homework or crayons. Something that shouldn't be there. The noise of the airport began to swell again behind them, voices, footsteps, the screech of a boarding call over the intercom. But for Claire, it all faded beneath the roar of instinct. The pounding certainty that they were standing at the edge of something far bigger than anyone here understood. And once again, the girl, small, quiet, unseen by most, lifted her head just for a breath and met Claire's eyes. Still no words, but this time there was no mistaking the message. Please. Claire didn't flinch. She had seen this kind of tension before, on traffic stops that turned sideways, in custody disputes at city shelters, in that split-second decision when someone decided they had more to lose than to cooperate. And this man, the one who called himself her father, who kept squeezing the girl's wrist every time someone looked too closely, he was teetering on that edge. I need you both to come with me, Claire said, her voice flat but unshakable. We'll step into a quiet area for screening. Shouldn't take long. The man didn't move. His mouth curled into something meant to be a smile, but it stopped at his teeth. Officer? Claire, is it? She's just scared. You see how your dog's acting? That's what's upsetting her. That's all this is. Claire let the silence settle. She didn't answer him. Instead, she looked to the girl again, the small child in the oversized hoodie, who hadn't said a word since this all began, who hadn't lifted her eyes again since that fleeting glance. The backpack hung off her shoulder like a weight too heavy for someone her size. She hadn't shifted her feet, hadn't spoken, hadn't pulled away. Children weren't that still. Aegis let out a low, thrumming sound, something between a growl and a warning. Claire didn't command him. She didn't need to. She could feel it through the leash, the way his whole frame vibrated beneath the surface. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't confused. He was sure. The man's fingers tensed again. Look, he said, attempting another charm-soaked explanation. It's been a long morning. We've got a flight to catch. Toronto. It's all their boarding passes, passports. If there's an issue, maybe a different officer could help us. Someone without the dog. He didn't look at Claire when he said it. He looked at the hallway behind her, the security gates, the blind corners, the possibility of escape. Aegis exploded. The bark tore through Terminal D like a bomb detonating. People jumped. A baby screamed. The teenage boy filming earlier dropped his phone. The sound wasn't just noise, it was declaration. That bark meant something was wrong. Here, now, right in front of them. Claire took a single step forward. Her boots echoed against the floor like punctuation. "Sir," she said, locking eyes with the man, "this is not optional." He turned to the girl, dropping to one knee as if to console her, but Claire saw it. That moment, the grip tightened again, enough that the girl flinched, barely. Aegis growled again, so low it buzzed along the tile. "Abby," the man said in a voice that tried to sound soft, but cracked under the weight of something deeper. "Tell the officer you're just nervous." Still, the girl didn't speak. But this time, slowly, carefully, she turned her head, just a few inches. Her eyes met Claire's again, and didn't look away. No tears, no words, only that silent scream hiding behind a quiet gaze. "Help me." Claire felt it in her ribs. Not logic, not policy, just something she knew in her bones. The same way she knew when a suspect was lying, or when Aegis's tail stiffened seconds before a seizure alert. You didn't ask how you knew. You just knew. She spoke into her radio mic without taking her eyes off the man. "Requesting secure room. Immediate. 1 juvenile. 1 adult. Possible false identity. K9 alert confirmed." The man's jaw flexed. "You need a supervisor to authorize that kind of—" "You're looking at one," Claire replied, not missing a beat. He straightened up slowly. His expression sharpened. No more false smiles. No more soft tones. His eyes turned flat. Cold. Calculating. Claire didn't blink. "Officers are en route to escort." A voice crackled in her earpiece. "Room C5 being prepped." Claire nodded once. "We'll wait right here." Seconds later, 2 airport officers approached, moving with trained purpose. The taller of the two flanked the man's right. The other stopped near the girl, gently extending a hand toward her elbow. The man didn't let go of her wrist. "Sir," Claire warned, "I need you to release her hand." "I don't like how this looks," he said, but he let go. The imprint of his fingers remained red on the girl's pale skin. Claire caught it. So did one of the other officers, who quietly angled his body between the man and the child. Then, for the first time, the girl, Abby, or whatever her real name was, looked down at Aegis. He didn't move. He didn't bark. But his ears flicked, ever so slightly, toward her. Her tiny hand reached out, just a whisper of a touch, fingertips brushing the side of his ear. Barely contact, but enough. Aegis stilled completely. Claire exhaled through her nose. That was it, the moment she needed. "We'll finish this in private," she said, stepping back to guide the way toward the secure screening room. No one applauded. No one even spoke. But the air shifted a change people couldn't name, but felt anyway, that something dangerous had passed near them, and somehow the dog had known before anyone else. And the girl, silent, bruised, but unbroken, followed. 10 minutes earlier, before the bark. Before the eyes of Terminal D turned toward the little girl and the dog who wouldn't let her vanish. They moved through the crowd like shadows wearing color. A man and a child, unremarkable, forgettable. A small traveling unit that didn't turn heads, didn't raise questions. He carried her boarding pass. She carried her backpack. No one stopped them. No one looked twice. The girl walked 3 steps behind him, her head always down, one hand fisted inside her hoodie sleeve. He didn't yank her, didn't shove. He guided her with an ease that looked like care to the untrained eye. A gentle touch at her shoulder, a slight pivot at her back. To the world, he appeared calm, responsible. Just another father navigating the exhaustion of airport logistics with a shy kid in tow. Their boarding passes read: Lawrence, Daniel, Lawrence, Abigail. Flight 613 to Toronto. Gate D, 17. International. Their passports matched. His picture was clean, wire-rimmed glasses, thinning hair, neutral smile. Hers showed a little girl with her hair pulled back and a pink jacket buttoned too high. Her cheeks were rounder in the photo. She wasn't smiling. She didn't smile now either. They reached the TSA screening line. The man made polite small talk with the officer checking IDs. "She's nervous about flying," he said with a tired parent chuckle. "First time. That's why she's not saying much." The girl didn't look up. Behind the counter, Agent Reena Kapoor gave a quick nod and checked the names on the documents. She was young, early 20s, still new enough to care about her job, but seasoned enough to know when something didn't sit right. Rena glanced down at the girl. Something about her posture tugged at the edge of her attention. Not the way kids usually slump or pout when they're bored. No, this was different. Too still, too silent, too blank. She bent slightly and offered a smile. "Hey there, sweetie. You got your stuffy with you? Most kids bring one for the plane." No answer. The man laughed gently. "She's shy." Rena looked at the little girl's hands, clenched, pale. The backpack with the octopus charm looked like it had been picked out by someone who wanted the world to believe she still loved rainbows. But that wasn't enough. The documents were clean. The names matched. Rena even ran a quick verification through their new system. Nothing flagged. No alerts, no restrictions. She scanned the man's eyes one more time. Steady, confident. A little too polished in his answers, maybe, but nothing she could hold on to. They moved forward. She watched them go. Something in her stomach turned that old warning bell. Not evidence, just instinct. But instincts didn't get you very far in a federal line without a single discrepancy. You needed proof. Something that would hold up in a report. Still, Rena couldn't help it. Her eyes followed the girl as she disappeared through the metal detector. The girl never once turned around. She didn't check for her dad, didn't ask questions, didn't even glance at the bright screen where cartoons played for waiting children. Her silence felt rehearsed, as if it had been practiced. Rena stepped out from her podium and leaned toward her supervisor near the scanning conveyor. "That pair Lawrence and his daughter something feel off to you?" Her supervisor didn't even look up. "We're swamped. Unless you saw a red flag, let it go." "I know. Just the girl." She didn't blink. Rena," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're still learning. Nervous flyers look weird all the time. That's not illegal." She bit back the urge to push again. Instead, she returned to her post and typed a short internal note. Not an alert, just a notation. Passenger pair 613, Lawrence, Daniel, and minor. No red flags. Slight behavioral anomaly noted in minor. Silence. Lack of visual engagement. Not escalated. She didn't know why she wrote it. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the ache that bloomed behind her ribs when she saw that small, motionless child drift out of reach with a man who didn't feel like a father. And 10 minutes later, when she heard the bark tear across Terminal D like thunder cracking open steel, her heart shot straight to her throat. She didn't know it yet, but that note she wrote, that quiet gut feeling she logged and let go, would be the only thread tying her to the story no one else got to hear. The one about a girl who didn't speak. A dog who didn't stop barking, and how, for once, instinct was enough to save a life. The holding room wasn't much more than a square of beige walls and government-issued silence. Overhead, the buzzing of fluorescent lights hummed like a tension wire, low and constant. Claire had brought them in quietly. No handcuffs, no raised voices, just protocol. But the air between her and the man sitting across the small metal table was starting to thicken. He looked like any other middle-aged man on the move button-down shirt, slightly wrinkled, messenger bag at his feet, travel-worn expression. But there was something wrong with how calm he was. Too calm. Claire stood against the wall at a slant, arms folded loosely, but her eyes missed nothing. Aegis lay in a tight sphinx-like posture beside her, his breathing even, but his gaze locked not on the man, but on the child. The girl sat pressed into the far corner of the bench, hoodie pulled over her head, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her knees were drawn close, toes barely touching the floor. A pink unicorn backpack sat neatly by her side. She hadn't spoken since they entered. The man leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Look, officer." "Claire Whitlock," she offered. "Right, Officer Whitlock. This is all a misunderstanding. We were just trying to catch our flight. She's nervous around dogs. That's all." Claire didn't respond. Instead, she studied the girl Emery, if the passport and boarding pass were to be believed. Emery L. Strauss, age 10. "She hasn't said a word since you got in here," Claire said quietly. The man gave a soft laugh, forced. "She's always been shy, especially with strangers." Claire tilted her head slightly. "Is that so?" He nodded. "I'm her father. We're traveling home to Denver. Her mother passed last year. It's been a hard adjustment for her." "Em?" The words felt rehearsed. Claire had interviewed too many people to mistake ease of speech for truth. Grief doesn't always line up neatly, but this man had no tremble, no wear on his voice. Just steady, courteous explanations. Emere, meanwhile, hadn't moved. Not unse. Claire approached slowly, kneeling slightly so she could meet the girl's eye level. Hey, Emery, my name's Claire. You don't have to be afraid. Aegis is very smart. He's not going to hurt you. The girl didn't look up. Her head remained bowed, hood casting a soft shadow over her features. Aegis didn't move either, but his focus had sharpened. Eyes narrowed, ears forward, tail still. Claire gently tapped the girl's backpack with her gloved finger. This yours? Still no response. The man spoke again. We had a long layover. She's tired. Aegis gave the faintest growl, not loud, but low and warning. The sound of instinct catching a scent no human could name. Claire stood back up slowly. Aegis doesn't usually growl unless he smells something he doesn't like. The man's smile faltered. Maybe it's just her food. Kids carry snacks. Claire turned toward him. Mind if I take a quick look inside the backpack? There it was. The flicker. It lasted less than half a second. A twitch at the jawline. An almost imperceptible shift in posture. But Aegis saw it. He stood up. The girl flinched. I'd rather you didn't, the man said quickly. There are some personal items. She gets embarrassed. Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped to the intercom by the door and pressed the button. Rena, can you bring me a supervisor and a female officer, please? A pause. Then Rena's voice came back, tight. Copy that. The man's fingers curled into a slow fist on the table, but his voice remained smooth. Is this really necessary? Claire turned, face unreadable. It is now. There was no yelling, no sudden action. But the shift was seismic. The holding room, still as a pond seconds before a storm, now vibrated with something unspoken. Claire walked back toward the girl, slower now. Emery, she said again, softer. Can you tell me what your favorite color is? This time, there was the slightest motion, a chin tilt, not a word, not even a whisper. But something in her shoulders relaxed for a heartbeat. Claire met her eyes just a flicker beneath the hood, and in that flicker, she saw it. The look. It wasn't fear of the dog, or of the room. It wasn't even fear of Claire. It was something much older, a kind of silent, soul-deep hoping. Not quite a cry for help, but close. It was the look of a child who had already learned not to expect rescue, but dared, in this one moment, to hope for it anyway. Claire swallowed against the dry knot forming in her throat. Aegis, now standing fully, took one step forward toward the backpack and let out a low, vibrating bark. Not loud but deliberate. The man stood suddenly. Hey, what the hell is going on? I'm going to call a lawyer. Aegis let out another bark, louder this time, stance rigid, hackles rising slightly. Sit down, Claire said sharply, eyes not leaving the girl. Now. The man hesitated, then sat. Outside the door, footsteps approached. Reinforcements. Claire knelt once more and placed her gloved hand lightly on the edge of the backpack. I'm going to open this, Emery. If there's something in here that doesn't belong, you don't have to be afraid. I just need you to stay still. Can you do that? A pause. Then barely perceptibly a nod. One nod. Claire reached for the zipper as the door clicked open behind her. She didn't know what she would find. Drugs. A tracking device. Maybe something worse. But Aegis was never wrong. And the girl's silence? It was never just silence. It was a message. The fluorescent light above flickered slightly just enough to make the corners of the holding room feel colder, hollower. Claire didn't blink as the man across the table raised his voice again, each word tinged with irritation masked as concern. We're going to miss our flight, he said, drawing out the syllables of flight as if that alone should loosen protocol. She's tired. She hasn't eaten all day. This is traumatizing for her. End. Claire leaned slightly forward, both hands folded on the table. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shift. And yet she hasn't said a word. The man opened his mouth to object again, but Aegis's low growl beat him to it. It wasn't loud, just a vibration, like a warning from something older than language. Claire didn't even look at the dog. She trusted that sound more than she trusted most people. The girl Emery, according to the documents, hadn't moved. Not really. She sat curled inward, her knees turned slightly to the wall, backpack still gripped between her legs like a shield. The hoodie was pulled so far forward it nearly masked her face, but it couldn't hide the way her shoulders twitched at each loud noise, or how her sneaker toes curled against the floor like she was trying to disappear into it. "Sir," Claire said again, more firmly this time, "we're conducting a secondary screening based on observed anomalies. I need you to remain seated and silent while I speak with—" She shifted her gaze, softening. "Emery." The man exhaled sharply. "She's not good with strangers. Or dogs." "She's doing just fine with the dog," Claire replied flatly. And then it happened. It was small, almost imperceptible. Emery's fingers, pale and small beneath the cuffs of her sleeve, reached forward, slowly, trembling, like she was reaching through some invisible wall that might collapse around her if she moved too quickly. She didn't look at Claire, didn't speak, but her hand extended toward Aegis, who had been sitting motionless by her side the whole time watching. And then she touched his ear. It wasn't a playful pet, nor a cautious pat. It was deliberate, gentle. The back of her hand brushed the fur just behind Aegis's upright ear, and her fingers stayed there for 1 silent second, then 2. Aegis didn't flinch, didn't even look away from the man, but Claire saw everything she needed in that touch. It was permission. It was trust. And it wasn't given lightly. Claire's breath caught for a moment, just a brief, quiet shift in the air. She had seen that kind of touch before, but never this exact way. It wasn't affection. It wasn't fear. It was the moment someone chooses a side, even if they don't have the words yet to say why. She stood up slowly and walked around the table, never turning her back on the man. Her fingers reached for the top zipper of the backpack nestled between Emery's shoes. The man's voice cut in like a blade. "You can't search that. That's her private property. You need consent or a warrant." "I have probable cause," Claire said, unzipping the first pouch. "And I have jurisdiction within TSA grounds." "Oh." He half rose from his seat. Aegis rose faster. His paws slid forward, body tense, shoulders hunched like a loaded spring. His bark this time wasn't a growl, it was sharp, reverberating against the walls. The man froze. Claire didn't flinch. Her fingers moved methodically, parting the fabric of the bag, her eyes scanning with the precision of someone who had unpacked more lies than luggage in her career. Inside the first compartment, a crumpled hoodie, small size, a book with bent corners, toothpaste. No weapons, no electronics. But then something too heavy for a girl her size to be carrying alone. She moved aside the clothing layer and paused. The inner lining was thicker than normal, reinforced. She touched the base of the bag, gently then pressed. A hollow sound. Not clothes, not books, false bottom. She looked up at Emery again. The girl's head was still bowed, but her fingers were now curled around Aegis's paw, tighter. The man tried to speak again, but Claire raised a finger without turning. No more. She turned the bag toward her, felt for the inner seam. A quick motion with the TSA blade from her belt, and the false bottom peeled back just enough to reveal metal. Lots of it. Tools, lockpicks, a tightly folded tracking device with foreign code markings. And at the very bottom, duct tape. Rolls of it. Claire exhaled slowly, then looked up at the man who suddenly wasn't blinking. "That yours?" she asked quietly. He didn't respond. Aegis stepped forward. The girl didn't resist when her grip loosened. Claire stood fully upright now, the bag still in her hand. "Emery," Claire said softly. The girl looked up for the first time, Felino hoodie, no curtain of hair. Her eyes were glassy, distant, but she nodded. It was just a single motion. But to Claire it meant, "Yes, this isn't mine. I didn't pack this. Help me." She turned back to the man, who had pressed his lips together into a thin, expressionless line. Claire stepped to the wall and tapped the emergency override on the door. "Detain him. Separate room. Secure holding." The intercom clicked and acknowledged. Before the man could protest, 2 officers entered. His chair scraped violently as he stood, but he didn't fight. Not with Aegis in the room. He only glared, and then muttered, "You don't know what you've just done." Claire didn't answer. because all her attention was now on the girl, who had, in a room full of noise and uncertainty, chosen to trust the dog first. And sometimes, that's where the truth begins. The man's smile arrived too quickly. It wasn't warm. It wasn't earned. It landed on his face like a well-practiced reflex, one that had worked in other places, on other people. But here, in the sterile quiet of the TSA holding room, it felt like someone had painted over broken glass. "Just candy and coloring books," he said lightly, with the kind of chuckle meant to downplay things. "That's all in there. She likes to draw. Don't you, sweetie?" He turned to the girl beside him, Emery. She didn't respond, didn't move, just stared at the wall, hoodie drawn up, the fabric pooling like shadows around her neck. Her hands, clenched in her lap, remained still. Claire didn't answer him right away. She was kneeling beside the backpack, her gloves on, eyes tracing seams and fabric tension like a surgeon eyeing a suspicious bulge beneath skin. Something wasn't right. She could feel it in her bones, but it was Aegis who confirmed it first. He had positioned himself by the girl's side earlier, close enough to offer presence, but not pressure. Now, without a command, he sat, ears pricked, muscles locked, and then a low, guttural growl started to rise in his chest. Not barking, not lunging, but warning. Claire looked up slowly, her voice calm but firm. "You said candy and books?" "Yeah," the man nodded, eyes crinkling with false reassurance. "She likes sour gummies, and she draws horses. You know how kids are." He said it like they were talking in a coffee shop, like this was nothing, like there wasn't a living, breathing creature 5 feet away growling with the precision of something trained to detect fear, deceit, and danger. Claire unzipped the first pouch of the backpack. Light stuff. Crinkled snack wrappers, a worn sketch pad, a single crayon, snapped in two. Then she rotated the bag, and her fingers paused. The weight. It was off, unbalanced. The left side sagged lower, heavier, as if something dense had been stitched or tucked inside. She looked at him again, and this time, he wasn't smiling. His eyes were following her hands, too carefully, too closely. Not like a father watching someone go through his kids' things, more like someone watching the clock tick down on borrowed time. Claire's voice was quieter now. "Do you mind if I ask Emery a few questions?" He shrugged, too fast. "She's shy, doesn't talk much with strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Claire said, her tone cool. "I'm Suh." The silence that followed was made of glass. Aegis didn't stop growling, and the girl still didn't speak. But her hand shifted, barely perceptible. A subtle movement. She reached toward Aegis's ear again, brushing it with 2 fingers. That touch. So small, so human. Claire had seen trauma before. In soldiers, in runaways, in children too young to have names for the things they'd endured. And that kind of stillness, the kind Emery carried like a second skin, didn't come from fear of flying or fear of dogs. It came from surviving something that never should have happened. Claire straightened eyes, never leaving the man's. "I'm going to continue inspecting the backpack," she said. "You'll remain seated. Understood?" Something behind his expression cracked. He didn't argue, but the shift in his body was instant, barely detectable. A twitch in his jaw, a pulse jumping at his temple. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said under his breath. "This is going to scare her." Claire didn't answer. She went back to the backpack and pressed gently along the lining. Thick, lumpy, uneven. Her fingertips caught the edge of something firm and rectangular sewn inside, beneath the fake bottom. And then a sound. Click. Aegis erupted. His bark shattered the silence, deep and thunderous. It wasn't the uncertain bark of curiosity. It was trained, targeted. A precise signal that could cut through airport chaos, active threat. The man froze. So did Claire. But Emery didn't. She flinched, eyes snapping toward the sound and then toward Claire. For the first time, she looked her directly in the face. And in those eyes, Claire didn't see confusion or fear of a dog. She saw hope. Faint. Fragile. A child's last attempt at reaching out in a world where adults had failed her. Claire rose slowly, her posture protective now. Between the man and the girl. Between whatever was in the backpack and whoever had packed it. "You need to step back," Claire said. Now, the man didn't move. His hands hovered at his thighs, calculating. Fight or flight. Somewhere in his brain, Gears were turning. Could he talk his way out? Run? Reach for the bag? Aegis's next growl was deeper. No mistaking it now. Claire moved one hand to her radio. Code 6, holding room B. Immediate support needed. No more smiles. No more charm. Just the thin veil of control slipping from a man who thought he was smarter than a dog. And the dog, unmoved, focused, eyes trained on the backpack, knew the truth long before anyone else. Claire moved slowly now, not with hesitation, but precision. Her hands, clad in latex gloves, had already pulled out the visible contents of the little girl's backpack. A tattered plush cat with its whiskers half missing, a coloring book curled at the edges, and a sleeve of grape-flavored candies, still sticky with warmth. On the surface, nothing looked amiss. But her instincts, honed by too many years and too many close calls, weren't ready to exhale. She rotated the backpack gently in her hands. Something in the weight had felt wrong from the beginning. She could hear the man behind her trying to repackage charm into frustration. "Officer, please," he said, his voice low, measured. "You're terrifying my daughter. We've done nothing wrong." Claire didn't answer. Her fingers followed the seams of the lining, eyes narrowing at the way the interior padding bulged. Not enough to raise suspicion to the casual glance, but she wasn't a casual glance. She was trained for subtle things. Weight shifts, fabric tension, the difference between a stuffed toy and a concealed compartment. And Aegis hadn't moved, still seated, still watching. But his head had dipped low, and a faint growl coiled inside his throat like the rumble of distant thunder. To anyone else, he looked calm, but Claire knew better. That growl meant he had smelled something or someone he was trained to remember. She gently slid her hand down the back wall of the backpack, then paused. There, the material shifted. Less give. A smoothness not meant to be there. Claire's voice didn't change volume. "Emery," she said softly, not turning her head. "Do you mind if I just check under this lining?" The girl didn't answer, didn't even look. She remained hunched on the bench, her hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands like armor. A child, made smaller, on purpose. Claire glanced back briefly. The man's jaw clenched, not visibly, but enough. His shoes, polished too well for a supposed economy traveler, made no sound against the linoleum. She noted the lack of scuff marks on the soles. Her fingers returned to the seam. The lining peeled back with a faint sound, like a whisper being lifted from a closed book. Claire reached inside. The tips of her fingers brushed something, not fabric, not plastic, duct tape, and beneath that, metal. Her breath caught just enough to stiffen her shoulders. Cold, smooth, dense. Too narrow for a laptop, too heavy for any child's toy. Not supposed to be there. She didn't yank her hand back. She withdrew it carefully, stood up, and met Aegis's eyes. The German Shepherd was fully alert now. Ears up, tail stiff, eyes locked. Claire turned toward the silent agent behind the mirror, nodded once. The holding room's quiet thickened like the moments before a storm. The man shifted just slightly in his seat, eyes darting too fast, too calculating. Claire knew that look. "Agent Wells," the man said, his voice calm but newly chilled. "That's private property. If you don't have a warrant—" "I don't need one under TSA jurisdiction," she replied flatly. Her hand hovered near her belt. "And I'm asking you to stay seated." And he stood, and so did Aegis. The dog's bark split the air, not loud, but sharp, commanding. It was a canine alert bark. Final. Official. A warning. The man froze. Claire took a slow step back, keeping her body between him and the girl. Another agent entered the room silently from the side door, eyes locked on Claire's signal. No weapons drawn yet, but their stances had changed. Claire's voice was low, not for drama, but because truth didn't need volume to be real. "There's something inside this backpack that doesn't belong on a plane. Something you hid." The man glanced toward Emery, just a flick of his eyes. Not concern, not love, just calculation. "Why would a man travel with a child he doesn't care to protect?" Claire asked quietly, rhetorically. Her voice softened, almost like a whisper. "Why does a girl not look at the man she's supposed to call Dad?" No one moved. And then, slowly, Claire looked toward Emery. "Sweetheart," she said gentler now, "is there anything you want to tell me? You're safe, I promise." The girl didn't speak, but one of her sleeves slid down. A bruise ringed her wrist, like a handprint made of shadow. Claire's jaw tightened. Another agent stepped into the room, wheeling a containment tray with a reinforced box. Claire gently set the backpack down, hands steady. "We'll take it to forensics," the agent said. "No," Claire replied. "We open it here. And the man finally spoke again. "You're making a mistake." But Claire didn't look at him. She knelt instead beside Aegis. The dog's body vibrated with tension, his breathing controlled but hyper-aware. She laid a hand on his chest. "It's okay, boy. We've got her." Aegis let out a soft exhale, not relaxed, but assured. He stayed right where he was. Not a guard dog now. A witness. As Claire turned back to the backpack, her fingers hovered again over the duct-taped edge. Her next move wouldn't just open a bag, it might crack the shell of something far bigger. She paused for a moment, looked at the girl again. Emery looked back. And this time, she didn't look away. There was no sudden movement, no yelling, no shouts or gunshots or cinematic explosion. Only the sound of breath tight, held and the smallest, most human click of a radio. Claire's thumb pressed the side button on her comm, voice low, measured. "Control, this is Bravo 9. Possible explosive device. Containment tray requested. Immediate lockdown recommended. Over." Static buzzed back. Then a single reply. "Copy, Bravo 9. Lockdown in progress. Evacuation protocol for Terminal D underway. SWAT en route." The air shifted. It was a change that wasn't visible so much as felt. A low current of urgency swept through the quiet room. The kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck rise before the mind can explain why. That instinct that belongs to prey in the wild or professionals, like Claire, who've stood too close to the brink too many times. He just stood. Not leapt, not barked. Just stood stiff. Ears forward, growl low and guttural. Vibrations reverberating through the tile like a warning from something ancient and knowing. Claire didn't look at the man. Not yet. Her eyes were still on the backpack, on the uneven flap of fabric she'd peeled back to reveal the wrongness beneath the normal. The strip of duct tape. The compact metal cylinder nested in silence. Something deliberately shaped not to draw attention. It hadn't beeped or blinked or hummed, but she could feel it. The weight of it. The way it didn't belong. She moved her hand away slowly. Calm. Deliberate. "Mr. Daly," she said, finally meeting his eyes. Her voice was gentle, almost apologetic. "I need you to stay seated." That was the moment everything turned. Because he didn't. Because something flickered in his eyes, something ancient and instinctual too. Not fear, but calculation, the kind that makes predators survive by milliseconds. His head tilted barely half an inch, but the whole room tilted with it. Claire saw it before it happened, the shift in weight to his left foot, the slight widening of the eyes, the hard swallow against a lie that was crumbling. Then he moved. Fast. Not a lunge. Not toward her, but away toward the door behind him, toward the hallway that hadn't yet been sealed. His chair clattered backward. His arm swiped the edge of the table as if that might send the backpack flying, buying him time. He made it 2 steps. Aegis made it 1. The bark that came from the dog wasn't loud in the traditional sense, but it was deep. It echoed somewhere behind the ribs, beneath the skin. It vibrated into marrow. It was the sound of refusal, of resistance, of something primal locking in. The man froze, just for a breath, then ran harder. Claire didn't scream. She didn't chase. Instead, she pressed her radio again, sharper this time. Suspect fleeing. White male, 40s, black jeans, gray hoodie. Lock hallway access now. K9 deployed. Do not fire, child still in room. She turned to Aegis. No words. Just a quick 2-finger point. Go. And Aegis went silent as breath, swift as a bullet with purpose. The door slammed behind the dog, magnetic locks buzzing as the system initiated lockdown. Red lights blinked to life overhead. Somewhere distant, a recorded voice calmly announced over intercom. "Attention all personnel. Please evacuate Terminal D. This is a precautionary security measure. Remain calm." The room emptied of sound again. Only Claire and the girl remained. Emery hadn't moved. Not once. She sat curled in her hoodie, knees drawn tight to her chest, backpack still on the table, contents exposed and shamefully unnatural. Claire turned to her now, not as an officer, not as a TSA agent, but as a woman. A human. "Emery," she said softly, moving slowly toward her. "You're safe now." The girl didn't answer, but her chin trembled. Her shoulders twitched in the smallest shudder. Her fingers found the hem of her sleeve and twisted over and over, a silent rhythm of nerves she hadn't yet learned how to name. Claire crouched in front of her, voice a hush. "I'm going to sit right here with you, just for a minute, okay?" The girl blinked. Not a nod, not a smile, but the stillness in her posture loosened just enough. Claire sat. The world outside the small room roared with silent chaos. Men and women rushed toward exits. Security gates lowered. Radios buzzed with overlapping instructions. But inside that room, time folded inward. Claire stared at the backpack, then back at the door where Aegis had vanished in pursuit. He wouldn't let the man get far. Not with a trail so fresh, not with instincts so sure. Still, Claire's heart beat loud in her ears. Not because of the man, not because of what she'd almost found in that lining, but because of the girl. Because children don't learn to go that still on their own. Because silence isn't just absence sometimes, it's armor. And because when a child says nothing, it often means she's been taught not to speak. Claire's voice, though quiet, held something hard now. A promise. "You did the right thing, Emery," she said. And at last, the girl looked up. Not a smile, not a tear, just one glance, steady, unblinking, as if trying to understand if this woman in front of her meant it. As if trying to believe. The hallway buzzed with distant shouts. Emergency lights pulsed, casting an eerie amber rhythm across the linoleum floor. Claire didn't even have time to finish her sentence. The manny's eyes like tightened wires, face frozen in a smile too long moved. Not like a traveler caught in confusion. Not like a father simply startled. It was deliberate. Sharp. Primal. He lunged. The officer standing near the door barely had a second to register what was happening before the man's elbow caught him squarely in the ribs. A dull, meaty crack echoed. The officer crumpled, air sucked from his lungs. Claire shouted, "Down!" But it was already too late. The man was bolting toward the hallway, toward the exit. Behind him, Emery flinched, her small body instinctively curling into itself. Aegis surged forward, tense and low, but held back by Claire's outstretched arm. "Stay!" The hallway door, the one they hadn't yet locked, was 10 feet away. The man was 5 feet from it. His stride was wild but precise, built not on panic but muscle memory. This wasn't the first time he'd run. He slammed into the door, pushed, and it didn't give. Automatic lockdown. Terminal D. The deadbolt had caught. He jerked the handle again. Again. Metal screamed against metal. Then a body crashed into him from behind. Officer Bryson, barely 23 and still nursing a bruised pride from last month's K-9 mishap, tackled with everything he had. They hit the floor hard, a twisting knot of limbs and adrenaline. The man fought like someone cornered by truth, not fear. He thrashed, elbowed, caught Bryson's shoulder hard enough to send a pop through the air. But Bryson didn't let go. Claire sprinted forward, her voice slicing through chaos. "Do not move! Hands where I can see them!" The man's response wasn't verbal. He reached. Not toward a weapon, but toward his own wrist. A small flick of the fingers. Claire recognized it, that kind of motion, like pressing a button. Her gun was out before her breath caught. "Aegis hold!" The dog was stone, his snarl low, steady. 2 more officers rushed in, pinning the man down. One of them barked into his radio for restraints. Another grabbed the man's hand, twisting it away from his body. There was nothing in it. No trigger, no detonation device. Just a plastic bracelet airport issued, tagged for TSA Fast Track. But Claire's gut didn't believe it. Secure his arms. Full restraint. I want him cuffed, zip-tied, and nowhere near that kid. Blood smeared across the tile beneath the man's head. A trickle starting from where he'd slammed it against the floor. His eyes fluttered open and locked onto Claire's crudity. Calm again. Too calm. His lips parted. "Is the dog going to bite me?" he asked, voice like someone discussing the weather. "No," Claire replied coldly. "But I might." She turned. Emery hadn't moved. She sat huddled on the metal bench, legs tucked beneath her, arms around her backpack, no empty hood drawn tight. But one small hand remained visible, trembling at her side. Aegis approached her slowly. Not a bark, not a growl, just a soft, near silent exhale. He nuzzled her hand with his nose. She flinched, then didn't. Claire felt her breath catch. The girl's fingers curled around the fur just behind Aegis's ear. Not tight, not panicked, trust. The hallway still rang with noise boots stomping, walkie-talkies blaring, an overhead voice trying to maintain some semblance of order. Terminal D remains under soft lockdown. Please await instructions. But inside this small room, the world felt still. Claire holstered her weapon, then knelt in front of the girl. Not too close, not above her, just level. "Emery," she said gently. "Can I sit here?" The girl gave no answer, but her grip on Aegis tightened. The dog sat beside her, tail calm, eyes never leaving the girl's face. Claire sat. The tile was cold beneath her. She glanced toward the man, now restrained, groaning as medics arrived. "You did the right thing," Claire whispered. "You didn't run. You didn't follow him. You're safe now." Still nothing. But in the girl's eyes, behind the layers of silence and fatigue and fear, something shifted. A flicker, the thinnest tremor of recognition. She wasn't invisible anymore. Claire waited. Not for words, just for presence. And after several seconds, Emery's eyes flicked toward hers. Not a plea, not a question, just a touch of trust. And in this business, in all its noise and chaos and urgency, that was everything. The room had been cleared of its noise. No yelling, no movement, not even the tap of a boot against tile. Only the sound of the containment box clicking shut and the faint hum of its climate seal. Claire stood just outside the holding room's blast-rated door, hands still gloved, heart ticking in a rhythm she'd trained herself to ignore. Her breath was slow, but shallow. Across the thick glass, the bomb squad technician leaned over the open backpack, his gloved fingers working methodically. Beside her, Aegis sat still leashed, still tense, still staring at that one spot where the backpack had been. "Easy, boy," she murmured. Her hand found the scruff of his neck, brushing gently along the fur. The shepherd didn't break his stare. Inside, the lead tech Rodriguez paused. Something had shifted in his body language, just barely. A slight weight in the shoulders. The kind a trained agent learns to read the way others read words on a page. Claire straightened. "He found something," she said aloud, though no one had asked. Rodriguez waved for the containment tray. A second tech stepped forward with the tray, a sealed unit lined in lead and foam. Whatever they were about to handle, it didn't belong in any backpack. Especially not one carried by a girl who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Rodriguez moved slowly, carefully pulling back the false lining of the backpack. It peeled away, with a soft tear velcro fused expertly into the seams. There, embedded in the cavity where no scanner would easily detect it, was a silver cylinder, 6 inches long, 3 across. Claire could see it even through the glass. No wires, no trigger, no blinking lights. But it was sealed tight, and on one end, someone had etched a symbol, a triangle inside a circle, barely visible unless you were looking. Rodriguez turned toward the outer door and lifted a single finger in the air. "Do not enter." Claire felt Aegis lean closer to the window. His muscles were taut, unmoving, not aggressive, not anxious, just alert. Like a bowstring pulled back, but not yet loosed. Inside, Rodriguez placed the cylinder gently into the containment tray and locked it down. Then came the second click, the magnetic seal, confirming closure. A moment passed, then another, and then Rodriguez stepped back and turned toward the inner microphone. "Confirmed. It's not explosive." His voice crackled through the comms. "Repeat not, a bomb." A collective exhale rippled through the observation team. But before relief could set in, he added something else. "It's sealed. Labeling indicates biological content. Unknown origin." Claire's stomach knotted. In a room full of professionals who dealt with death devices and detonators, biohazard wasn't just a scarier word, it was an entirely different language. It was the kind of thing that rewrote protocols, changed who was in charge, made people back away without knowing why. Claire exchanged a look with Thompson, the airport incident commander. He was pale beneath the mustache, blinking like someone just turned off the gravity. "You said the guy had a clean record?" Claire asked quietly. Thompson nodded, his voice tight. "Nothing flagged, but we'll run the prints again. Deeper, this time." Claire turned to the security monitor. The man, whoever he was, sat cuffed and sullen in the adjoining detainment cell. A scrape marked the side of his temple from where he'd hit the tile earlier. His left eye had started to swell. Still, he held himself like a man expecting rescue, or payoff, or both. But not guilt, not grief. She'd worked enough trafficking cases to know what panic looked like in real time, and this man wasn't panicked. He was waiting. Claire's gaze moved to the second screen. Emery sat alone in the adjacent observation room, a blanket around her shoulders now, untouched crackers, and a juice box on the table in front of her. Her eyes, large and unreadable, were focused not on food or noise, but on the faint smudge of Aegis's noseprint still left on the glass. Claire swallowed. What the hell were they transporting? Rodriguez's voice crackled in again. "We need CDC, or military biohazard response. Possibly both. This isn't commercial grade, not even black market." Claire blinked. "Then what is it?" Rodriguez didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. Behind her, Aegis gave a low, vibrating sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine. Claire crouched next to him. His breath was shallow, still hyper-focused. "It's okay," she whispered, brushing a hand along his back. "You did good. We're safe." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it, because the stillness hadn't broken. The stillness had deepened, like something beneath the surface had heard its name whispered and was now listening. Claire stood slowly, turning back toward Thompson. "Get a full medical evac plan in place. Secure all exits from Terminal D, and do not under any circumstances let anyone in that room touch that container again." Thompson nodded and moved to his radio. Claire looked back once more through the glass. Rodriguez had backed away from the tray. He was staring at it now, not with fear, with recognition. Claire felt the hairs rise on her neck. She tapped her comms. "Get me someone from Homeland. A beat, and find out if any classified shipments have gone missing in the last 72 hours. I want to know if we're looking at stolen government research, or something no one was ever supposed to know existed." Aegis shifted beside her, one paw edging toward the blast door again. The shepherd didn't need training for this. He already knew. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't supposed to be anywhere, especially not in a child's backpack. And now, the silence wasn't just stillness. It was warning. The X-ray monitor flickered once, then stabilized. Claire stood with her arms folded, jaw tight. She hadn't blinked since the tray rolled into position beneath the scanner. Aegis sat behind Herculant now, but alert, every muscle held in quiet tension, his breath shallow. Eyes locked on the metal case like it could move on its own. Inside the small holding bay turned impromptu threat assessment room. The air was cold not just from the overcompensating air conditioning, but from something deeper. That kind of cold that creeps into your spine before you know why. On the monitor, the silhouette of the thermal case emerged. Thick insulation, heavy latches, reinforced lid. Then the contents lit up. Cylindrical shapes, tightly packed. One of the techs leaned closer, frowning. "Zoom and enhance that section." The screen adjusted. Dozens of small vials. No two exactly the same. Some had factory-printed barcodes. Others bore only faded handwriting cursive. Almost gentle, like they'd once belonged in a family fridge instead of a classified container. Claire narrowed her eyes. The labels weren't in any recognizable format, no pharmaceutical logos, no expiry dates, no dosage instructions. Some had strange, looped symbols. One simply said L27, viable, in red marker. Another had no writing at all, just a crude drawing of a human eye. The technician exhaled, low and uneasy. "That's not research," he said, barely above a whisper. Claire glanced over at him, her voice level. "You sure?" He nodded once, the color draining from his face. "This isn't how any of us transport viable samples. This case isn't about preservation, it's about secrecy. And look at the inner lining. That's lead mesh. Someone didn't want this to be scanned. Another tech leaned in, his fingers tapping rapidly on a tablet. No registration on any national health agency. These cereals aren't even close to biomedical norms. They're made up. Claire turned to the senior bomb squad led beside her. Chemical? He shook his head. No trace indicators of explosives, no accelerants, no detonation mechanism. But I don't like this. These seals, they're tamper-proof, but not standardized. That's usually the kind of thing we see when someone doesn't want a paper trail. A silence settled in the room, thicker than before. Aegis let out a low breath, almost a huff. Not a warning, not a growl, just acknowledgement. Like he felt it too, the wrongness of it all. Claire approached the tray. She didn't touch anything, just looked. One vial had cracked slightly, no leak, but condensation had built inside. The liquid shimmered strangely under the light. Not quite clear, not quite opaque. It pulsed faintly, like it was responding to the room's breath. Jesus, the younger tech whispered. What is this? Claire's voice was quiet. Something no one was supposed to find. The door behind them opened with a hiss. It was the agent from DHS Warranty, one they'd called as soon as the object was flagged. His eyes swept the room quickly before falling on the monitor. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, simply, "Is that all of it?" Claire shook her head. "We haven't opened the false bottom yet." Warren stepped forward, his shoes echoing too loudly on the tile. "Then don't." "Not yet. We need containment protocols and secondary verification. We might be dealing with something synthetic, or worse." Claire's brow creased. "Bioweapon?" He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. Aegis finally stood, stepping quietly beside her, brushing her thigh with his side. His ears stayed forward. His stance wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't calm either. Claire crouched beside him. Her hand rested gently against his shoulder. The silent tether between handler and K9 reconnected, reaffirmed. He didn't need to be told what was happening. He knew. She looked back at Warren. "You need to know something else," she said. "The girl Emery. She touched Aegis when I was going to search the bag. Just a soft brush on the ear. A signal." Warren's face didn't change, but Claire saw the flicker behind his eyes. She knew, she added. "She's not just baggage. She's part of this." For a beat, no one spoke. Then Warren gave a single nod. "Secure the vials. Mark the cracked one for priority analysis. I'm pulling in biocontainment support. No one leaves this floor without clearance." The second door locked behind him. Claire exhaled slowly. She looked once more at the vial set, what lived inside them, whatever it was. Beyond science, beyond what had any business being in a child's backpack. In the corner, Aegis didn't move. He stared at the case like he could hear it breathing. And maybe, in some impossible way, he could. The fluorescent lights in the detention room gave off a quiet hum, broken only by the intermittent clack of a keyboard and the low murmur of radio static. Claire sat across from the man, if that was what she could even call him now. No cuffs on his wrists anymore, just bruising purple rings where they'd pressed down too tight during the scuffle. He hadn't said a word since being tackled. Not one. Aegis was lying behind her. Not relaxed, not tense, but watching. Always watching. A tech entered with a tablet, face tight. He offered it to Claire, saying nothing, just a short inhale that said everything. She tapped through the biometric scan results. The fingerprints lifted from the suspect's hands had returned, but not to Daniel Lawrence, not even to anyone remotely close. Instead, a digital trail unraveled like a jagged map, false passports, ghost identities, air travel records, spliced across countries that didn't share extradition. In Prague, he'd been Martin Gelb. In Singapore, Jonas Frey. In Mumbai, Luca Veit. Claire blinked slowly. "This isn't just a false ID," the tech said. His voice hushed, like the walls could listen. "He's been cycling identities for over a decade. Nothing sticks. No social footprint. No origin. No family. He doesn't exist." End of 2. She turned back toward the man, still sitting upright. Eyes fixed forward, but not vacant alert, calculating. A kind of silence that wasn't empty, but prepared. He wasn't breaking because there was nothing to break. Whatever he'd carried inside that thermal-lined backpack, it wasn't his first delivery. and it wouldn't have been his last. Interpol flagged a partial match, the tech added. Surveillance footage, Berlin, 2019. Bioweapons raid. Files were redacted, but some facial mapping lined up. Claire felt something heavy shift in her chest. Black market? She asked. He nodded. Off-book pathogen exchanges. Rumors of engineered viruses, synthetic strands that don't exist in public databases, not even in military labs. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, watching the man who didn't blink. Her voice dropped, steady. "Who sent you?" He didn't move, not a muscle, not even a flicker in the jaw. "Tell me what's in those vials," she pressed. "We caught it before it reached the gate, but if it made it here once, it'll happen again." Silence. Her tone hardened. "You're transporting something with no pharmaceutical markings, handwritten labels, and a container that bypassed 3 scanners. You ran for a reason." His lips twitched, just a little. A small curve, not amusement, not panic. Something darker. Maybe pride. Maybe fatalism. Claire couldn't tell. Aegis let out a low growl, the kind that vibrated against the floor tiles, like thunder just beneath the surface. The man's eyes shifted. Not toward Claire, not toward the 2 agents watching from behind the two-way mirror, but toward Aegis. And for the first time, something flickered. Not fear, not curiosity. Recognition. Claire caught it, the infinitesimal narrowing of his pupils, the half-second drop of his brow. He knew the dog. Or knew of the dog. She stood slowly. "You've seen him before." No answer. She stepped to the side, giving the man a clearer view of Aegis. The German shepherd didn't move, just held that steady, unwavering gaze, the kind that had cornered suspects in alleyways, sniffed out explosives buried beneath playground mulch, and now sat guarding a room that held something the world wasn't supposed to see. Claire's voice softened, almost a whisper. "What did they tell you he was trained for?" The man blinked. Claire stepped closer. "What are you smuggling for them? Who trained you to carry things like that across international borders? You didn't just pick that backpack up off a bench. You're part of something built for this." The man finally spoke, voice gravel-thin. "You think you're stopping something?" Claire didn't flinch. "I know we are." He shook his head. "Number? You're just the first domino." Behind the glass, one of the agents moved clearly, picking up on the phrase. Claire felt a chill lick up her spine. What does that mean? The man just stared at her. She took a breath, grounding herself. Her fingers brushed the tablet again. Dozens of locations. Dozens of names that were all lies. No job history. No military record. No paper trail. He was a courier, maybe. Or maybe a volunteer in something darker. Someone whose own identity had been erased willingly or forcibly to serve a cause that didn't care whether he lived or vanished. She stepped toward the door. "We'll find out who you are, even if you don't." As she left, Aegis followed without a word. Outside, the hallway smelled of antiseptic and something faintly metallic. Claire exhaled slowly and turned to the tech who'd handed her the results. "Bring up every flagged bioterror cell working across Eastern Europe in the last 5 years," she said. "Cross-reference courier profiles. Look for facial matches, even if the names don't line up." He nodded and rushed off. Claire leaned against the cool concrete wall for a second. Aegis pressed his body near her leg, grounding her. The kind of quiet comfort no one asked for, but always noticed once it was gone. She looked down at him. He's not a smuggler. He's a weapon. Aegis's ears twitched. Somewhere behind those two-way mirrors, alarms weren't sounding yet. But they would. Claire knew it. You didn't find vials with no pharmaceutical registry, no markings, and a man with no name, unless someone wanted to make sure you'd never know what hit you until it was already inside the walls. She pressed the radio on her vest. "Patch me through to DHS. We're gonna need intel sharing open across the board. I want Langley. I want CDC. And find out who's missing a handler trained in canine countermeasures." Aegis let out a small huff, not quite a growl, but not a sigh either. Like he too felt the pressure building, the unseen clock ticking down. Claire looked down at him again. "We're not even close to done, boy." And Aegis, faithful as always, didn't break eye contact. Because some wars don't start with bullets. Some start with silence, and something that shouldn't be breathing in a vial the size of a finger. Claire stood motionless in the hallway, her fingers brushing over the laminated printout just handed to her. The name at the top blurred for a moment. She blinked hard, twice, as if that might shift the ache settling behind her eyes. Emery Quinn, age 9, missing 18 days. Last seen, Houston, Texas. Status, Amber Alert, cold. It was the photo that did it. The tiny girl with a crooked braid, one tooth missing from her smile, holding a plush rainbow octopus in both hands, like a talisman. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The octopus. The same one sewn into the side pocket of the backpack. The same bag Aegis had signaled. The same bag the man was carrying like it was nothing. She stared at the photo, then the backpack, now sealed inside the evidence bin under UV-lit glass. Her fingers curled into a slow fist by her thigh. She wanted to tear something apart. Instead, she exhaled. She was supposed to be home, Claire murmured, barely audible. Behind her, Aegis let out a faint chuff and sat down, but his ears remained alert, eyes locked on the containment room beyond the plexiglass. He hadn't relaxed since they brought the man in. Claire hadn't either. A technician entered quietly, slipping a paper file onto the metal table without a word. Claire nodded in thanks, her movements mechanical. She opened the folder. Inside were the cross-verified results from the database scrape. Not just any Amber Alert, but one flagged with suspicious circumstances abduction during a foster transition. No ransom demands, parents ruled out. It was never about ransom. Claire sank slowly into the nearest chair. She remembered that day vaguely. The bulletin had come across the interagency channel, a quiet ping amid a sea of noise, another missing child. She'd seen too many. But something about the girl's eyes in the photo now. They didn't look scared. They looked held back, like someone had told her not to speak, not to scream, not to even hope. The same look she'd seen on rescued kids before. The ones who never cried, just curled into corners with their knees pulled tight. God, she whispered, the word barely forming. Claire, a voice said gently from the side. It was Melina, one of the analysts. Are you okay? She nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. The octopus was custom-made. The mother uploaded the design to Etsy 2 years ago for her birthday, Melina continued. There's no doubt. It's hers. And they're one. Claire closed her eyes and pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. Behind her lids, she saw flashes of earlier Aegis barking, the man running, the chaos. And under it all, the weight of what they'd almost missed. 18 days. That girl had been gone for 18 days. And she'd been at the airport today. In that bag. Claire stood up. Her legs trembled for just a second. Where is she? She asked quietly. Melina hesitated. We don't know yet. The suspect won't speak. Lawyered up instantly. And she wasn't with him when he arrived, just the bag. TSA checked him in from Warsaw 2 days ago. But the bag? There's no child listed on his flight. Claire looked toward Aegis. He was still focused, not pacing, not whining, just alert, as if sensing something else not yet spoken aloud. She's not with him, Claire repeated more to herself. But that bag, it's like a breadcrumb, a piece of her. He's moved her, staged her somewhere, or passed her off. And the contents, Melina added, voice growing tight. They were meant to distract us. The biohazard vials? It worked. Everyone's focused on what's in the case. But the real crime wasn't metal or glass. Claire stared again at the photo. She's the payload, she said softly. Melina nodded. For a moment, the room went silent except for the distant hum of air vents and the soft sound of Aegis's breathing. Claire stepped over to him, knelt down, and ran a hand gently down his neck. You found her, she whispered, even when we didn't know what we were looking for. Aegis leaned into her touch, just slightly, enough to say, I'm here. I see it too. She stood again. The storm in her gut was rising now, grief mixing with fury. I want everything we have on the man's route. Street cameras, luggage tracking, who he spoke to at arrivals, every passenger manifest on that flight, and whoever met him at the gate. I want airport staff cross-checked. If he passed her to someone else, we find that link. Melina scribbled quickly. And Claire posed, voice keyed now. Get me access to Emery's family. I want to know everything they remember about her favorite snacks. Words she knew Anything odd leading up to the disappearance. If she's still alive, we need something to help her recognize we're not the enemy when we find her. A flicker of guilt passed through Melina's face. Do you think she still is? Alive? Claire didn't answer at first. She looked through the plexiglass one more time. That damn rainbow octopus. She was with him long enough to leave something behind, she said finally. She wanted to be found. That's why the toy was still there. Kids cling to what's familiar, but they only leave it behind when they're told they can't carry hope anymore. And somehow, that was the worst part. The thought of a child surrendering her most precious thing because the man said no toys, or no bags, or simply, don't look back. Aegis let out a low, mournful sound beside her, almost a whimper, but buried under self-control. Claire glanced at him. I know, buddy, she murmured. Then she turned to the wall of screens, already lighting up with surveillance frames. The hunt had just changed, and somewhere, Emery was waiting. Maybe afraid, maybe silent. But she was still out there, and they weren't leaving without her. The evidence was laid out like pieces of a puzzle no one wanted to finish. Inside the dimmed operations room, the hum of fluorescent lights barely covered the thick silence. Screens glowed with data streams, security footage, and border logs. Claire stood motionless, her arms crossed, shoulders rigid as a new wave of dread took hold. On the table, the thermal containment case, open now. Empty vials lined in neat rows, like soldiers asleep in a coffin. No residue, no smell. But the labels handwritten, smudged, numbered in a sequence that made no medical sense, told their own story. None of this should have made it past inspection, muttered Agent Alvarez, flipping through a manifest printed on ultra-thin polymer paper. Radiation shielding, thermoregulation, and the linings laced with silver iodide. Whoever built this knew exactly what each checkpoint screened for. He handed the case to a forensic specialist who examined the interior with a handheld scanner. No elevated radiation, no traceable narcotics, no bioagent alarms triggered. Yet when he lifted the lid, he involuntarily stepped back, as if his body knew what the machines couldn't. Claire's voice, quiet but sharp, cut through the still air. Where was he headed? Final destination was Copenhagen, replied the analyst at the far console. He booked a one-way ticket using the alias Daniel Lawrence. Conference on Global Agrogenomics at the Thorson Institute. He was scheduled to present. Claire's brow furrowed. Present what? Abstract title just says, Cryogenic Stability of Novel Synthetic Strains. No author bio, no institutional affiliation, no references. A long breath filled the space. Claire turned her eyes to the security footage again. Frame by frame, she watched the man, the ghost in borrowed names, stride through Terminal D just hours earlier. Nothing in his gait betrayed the stakes he carried. Nothing in his face betrayed the weight of a child stolen or vials filled with the unknown. But one creature had sensed it. Aegis sat now in the corner of the room, eyes locked on the case. His ears twitched, his breathing shallow but measured, like a soldier not yet called off duty. Claire moved toward him and crouched low, her fingers brushing the side of his scruff. He leaned slightly into her touch, not seeking comfort, but offering it. You felt it before we did, she whispered. Not smell, not sight, something deeper, some residue of fear or memory. The kind of thing machines weren't built to notice. But dogs like Aegis, trained not only by scent but by soul, picked up what humans refused to believe. She remembered the way his body had stiffened, the low, growling whimper that didn't match a narcotics hit or explosive trace. A different alert. An emotional signature. He couldn't name only signal. Alvarez spoke again, breaking the reverie. They were 20 minutes from boarding. Once they reached Copenhagen, we'd never have seen them again. No extradition. Diplomatic immunity might have come into play. Claire straightened. They were going to demonstrate the strain at the conference? Alvarez shook his head. No. I think they were going to distribute it, hidden in the guise of scientific collaboration. We just don't know what it is yet. A young lab technician leaned in through the open door, eyes wide. Preliminary tests show engineered proteins. Synthetic in origin, but she hesitated. But they bond to neural tissues. Fast, like unnaturally fast. It's not a virus, not a drug. We think it might be part of a larger system. Claire stared at her, the pieces clicking faster than her brain could filter. You're saying it's modular? Or programmable? The tech whispered, like something waiting for a trigger. Silence returned. Claire's mind spun. Vials, coded with sequence numbers. A stolen child who didn't speak. A carrier with no past. And a dog who'd sensed all of it, long before any of them had understood the shape of what they were dealing with. They almost got away. She swallowed hard. A sick knot settled in her chest, not from fear, but from knowing how easily this could have been another unsolved story, filed away as a security breach that never happened. We need the press to stay out of this, Alvarez said suddenly, his voice tight. For now, the public can't know. If there's more of this out there, we need time to find it. Quietly. Claire nodded. Agreed. But I want everything traced. Every shipment, every attendee at that conference, every lab that received samples. And someone needs to re-interview every customs dog unit from the last 6 months, if even one of them had a reaction like Aegis. She didn't need to finish the sentence. She looked back to Aegis. He hadn't moved. For a moment, she just stared, letting the room fade, letting the screens dim, letting the science and politics dissolve. There was only the dog. Still, focused, present, as if he knew what she did not yet know. Aegis wasn't just a tool. He wasn't just a dog. He was a compass. And tonight, he'd pointed them away from a quiet kind of catastrophe. She bent forward, pressed her forehead gently to his. Thank you, she whispered into the space between heartbeats. And for the first time since the arrest, Aegis let out a soft exhale, the kind that sounded almost like peace. Almost. Because they both knew this wasn't the end. It was just the part where the story stops pretending to be simple. The hallway to Claire's office had never felt this long. Her boots made soft, tired clicks on the linoleum, echoing in a way that reminded her of hospital wings at night, too clean, too quiet. Aegis padded beside her, a silent shadow, the rhythm of his steps matching hers. But his ears were still sharp, eyes scanning every passing doorway. He didn't trust the quiet. Not anymore. Claire didn't either. She pushed open the door to her office and let it shut behind her with a soft thunk. The overhead lights flickered on, too harsh against her fatigue. She stood still for a beat. Then two. Her badge still hung around her neck, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the plastic, as if the answers might be etched into it. She sat down slowly, as if her body had finally caught up to the weight in her chest. The moment her spine met the chair, it all came flooding in the thermal case. The vials with no logos, the whispers from the techs, and above all, the image of that little girl, Emery Quinn, 9 years old, brown hair in a messy braid, dirt under her fingernails, a bruise darkening along her jawline, fading but still visible, and eyes that didn't blink when you spoke to her, just stared, wide and glassy, like she was trying to stay invisible even while being seen. Claire swallowed hard, but the lump in her throat remained unmoved. She pulled up the crime scene photos again, even though she didn't need to. They were burned into her memory. Emery, clinging to the rainbow octopus backpack like it was the last piece of home she had left in this world. And maybe it was. Claire had seen trauma before, children ripped from raids, teens hardened by the streets, but this girl, this silence, it wasn't born from defiance or confusion. It was deeper, a kind of void. Like someone had carved the voice right out of her, not with force, but with design, systematic, purposeful. That thought hit harder than she expected. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, rubbing her temples with fingers that still trembled faintly. Aegis settled by her feet with a quiet sigh. But even now, his eyes didn't close. He knew the fight wasn't over. He could feel it in her breath, in the way her muscles twitched under tension. A soft knock at the door. Claire didn't lift her head. Come in. Agent Morin stepped in with a clipboard, but his expression told her he wasn't there for routine updates. His voice was low, careful. Emery's in protective care. Pediatric trauma specialist is with her now. She hasn't spoken. Won't even nod or shake her head. Claire's jaw clenched. Any signs of physical abuse? No overt injuries beyond what we saw. But he paused, eyes darkening. They found a micro-injection site just below her hairline, too precise for accident. Medical staff say she may have been drugged. Repeatedly, Claire closed her eyes, steadying the storm behind her ribs. "How many others?" she asked quietly. "How many kids like her out there right now, being passed through checkpoints with forged passports and sterilized containers?" Morin didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because the truth would drown them both. She stood, slowly walking over to the whiteboard on the far wall, once filled with schedule notes and threat assessments. She wiped it clean with the side of her hand, leaving only smeared ghosts of words, and wrote 3 names. Daniel Lawrence, alias. Untraceable. Emery Quinn. 9. Missing, nonverbal. Biohazard vials. No registry. No origin. No known markers. She underlined the last one twice, then wrote one more word beneath it, in all caps. Intent. What were they doing? She said aloud, almost to herself. Not testing, not researching, preparing. Morin shifted. There's chatter already. Copenhagen Conference has ties to several biotech firms. Pharma executives, government officials. If that container had gotten through, then we weren't looking at a trafficking case. Claire finished for him, her voice rough. We were looking at deployment, trial run, on civilians. Her hand tightened around the marker until her knuckles paled. Aegis gave a quiet chuff, ears twitching at the tension in the room. Claire reached down, fingers brushing his fur. It grounded her, just enough. This wasn't about money, she said. It wasn't ransom. They didn't even ask for one. Emery wasn't taken to be returned. She was part of the cargo, Morin said grimly. But she wasn't listed on any manifest. Claire's breath caught. She turned back toward her desk and opened the file folder with Emery's intake report. The photos, the belongings, everything the girl had with her. And then one item stood out. A small plastic charm attached to the zipper of her backpack. Shaped like a dolphin. Seemingly innocent, Claire pulled the evidence photo closer. There, she whispered. Zoom in. The charm had no seams. No manufacturer markings. Too clean. Too deliberate. Send this to forensics, she said. I want to know if that thing's hollow. You think it's a tracker? Morin asked. Claire shook her head slowly. Number. I think it's something worse. The silence between them stretched. Finally, Morin spoke. You think she knew? Claire didn't answer right away. She looked toward the window. Rain had begun to fall again, smearing the glass with thin, trembling lines, like the sky was crying for those who couldn't anymore. Then, softly she said, I think she tried to forget, and that was what haunted her the most. Not what had been done, but what had been designed to be forgotten. The press conference was over in less than 7 minutes. Claire watched it from the back of the room, standing just behind a drawn curtain, where the harsh podium lights didn't reach. Her arms were crossed, fingers buried in the sleeves of her blazer like she could hide inside the fabric. No mention of the girl, no images, no thanks. Just a rehearsed statement from a DHS liaison who didn't look anyone in the eyes. There was a brief security concern at Terminal 2B. The situation was resolved without any civilian injuries. We commend our personnel for their rapid response. Rapid response. Claire's jaw tightened. The little girl hadn't moved, hadn't uttered a sound, as agents in unmarked coats led her down the corridor with soft voices and quick footsteps. Emery Quinn, age 9, missing for 18 days, hadn't even looked back. Not at Claire, not even at Aegis. And now, no one would know she had ever been there. The media had already turned its attention elsewhere. A senator's scandal, a wildfire out west, a viral video of a raccoon robbing a donut shop. The moment had passed, buried beneath a headline that read like static. Claire stepped out into the hallway. Her heels clicked against the tile, the sound sharp in the empty corridor. Everything had been sealed, scrubbed, sanitized, signed off. She had signed it too. The NDA lay heavy in her shoulder bag. It was just one page, stark in its precision. You are forbidden from speaking of the recovered child, the biological materials, the suspect identities, the canine asset. Even the language was clinical. Not Emery, Not vials of unknown origin. Not Aegis. Just placeholders. Ghosts behind black ink. She had signed it with a pen that shook in her hand. Because the other option, they'd made it clear. The case would be reassigned, quietly buried. Aegis would be removed from field status, possibly transferred out of country. She wouldn't be allowed to follow. There would be no reunion, no protection. And Claire had looked at him, her dog, her partner, sitting with quiet alertness by the girl's side as she was examined by a trauma specialist. His ears tilted to every whimper, his tail still, his body tense, but his eyes soft, as if guarding something fragile, as if he understood. She would not lose him. Not again. The vending machine hummed at the end of the hallway. She stared at the rows of wrapped candy and bottled water and thought about how absurd it was that the world could look so normal. Emery had been used, her body marked with injection sites so faint they wouldn't be noticed by anyone who didn't know what to look for. Her vocal cords, they suspected, weren't damaged, just silenced by fear, or worse, by a conditioned response. Something taut. And the vials. Claire hadn't slept since seeing them under X-ray. 23 glass tubes. Some with labels handwritten in a spidery scrawl, others with only color-coded caps and dates. No pharmaceutical insignias, no standard codes. One had a smear of what looked like ash along its side. "This isn't research," one technician had whispered. Claire hadn't argued. Her stomach had already told her that. A quiet set of footsteps approached behind her. She turned. Aegis. He stood there, coat still ruffled from the day's chaos. The patch on his vest read K9 Unit, but under it was a smear of dust, where a fingerprint had once been. Claire knelt down slowly. He came to her without hesitation. She touched his face. His eyes blinked slowly. In his silence, she felt the only truth that still held weight, the one not redacted. "You did it," she whispered. Her voice broke. "You saw what none of us could." He leaned into her hand, not with need, with understanding. And then, like always, he looked past her ears, tilting slightly, nose twitching as if hearing something beyond the walls. Something she couldn't hear. Something human machines were never built to detect. Back in the debrief room, someone had said, "It's a miracle he picked up on it." But Claire knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was instinct. Trauma recognizes trauma. And maybe that's what Emery carried in her scent, a whisper of terror that machines couldn't measure. But Aegis could. Because he had lived it. He had been discarded, too, once. After his unit disbanded. After an injury left him less than perfect. Forgotten by the system that created him. Left to rot in a cage. Until Claire had found him underweight, silent, but not broken. Never broken. Now, he had saved a life. And no one would know. There would be no medal. No front-page photo. No children's book with his silhouette under a sunset sky. Just more silence. Another page turned. Another girl, recovered name, omitted for her protection. A line in a sealed report, buried with the rest. Claire stood slowly. She looked down at him, this creature of muscle and instinct, whose loyalty had never wavered. "We carry it," she said softly. "The truth, even if no one else will." Aegis looked up, eyes steady, and in them, she saw what the news would never print. Not just the cost of justice, but the beauty of it too when done without credit, without spotlight, without applause. They walked the corridor in silence. And somewhere far away, a little girl named Emery might one day sleep through the night because of them. But no one would ever know. The conference room they chose for the reunion looked nothing like the frantic corridors of Terminal D. The fluorescent glare had been dimmed to a soft amber, the blinds drawn, the whir of the HVAC turned down to a hush. 2 chairs sat side by side, vacant for now. Beneath a framed poster that read, "Hope is not cancelled" in blocky pastel letters, volunteer from Victim Services had taped it up as if good intentions alone could soften the edges of reality. Claire waited just outside the door with Aegis. She could feel the dog's weight leaning lightly against her leg, that silent insistence that he would go where she went. Beyond the glass, Emery sat on a padded bench, knees drawn up, blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes followed the pattern on the carpet as though tracing a secret map she could not share. A soft commotion rose at the far end of the hall. Footsteps 3 sets. hurried yet muffled. A hush of emotional static seemed to charge the air. "They're here," whispered the liaison. Claire's pulse ticked faster. She glanced at Aegis, his ears pricked, head tilting toward the approaching sound. He sensed the storm of feelings before they breached the doorway. Fear, hope, disbelievery note of it, woven into the cadence of incoming breaths. First, through the threshold, was a woman in her mid-30s, hair once carefully styled, now unraveled by weeks of sleepless nights. Her eyes red-rimmed, cheeks hollow, but glowing with something raw and electric. Behind her, clutching her elbow, strode a tall man-stubble like sandpaper, jaw set hard until he spotted the blanket-swaddled figure inside. His breath hitched audibly. Mr. and Mrs. Quinn. They paused, just over the threshold, as if afraid the scene might dissipate like a mirage. Claire stepped aside, guiding them forward with a gentle hand and an unspoken "be slow." Emery looked up when she sensed the shift in the room. Wide, uncertain eyes. Recognition dawned slow, like sunrise through thick fog. Her small fingers dug into the fleece blanket, and for a heartbeat, Claire feared the girl might bolt into her shell again. But Mrs. Quinn fell to her knees, arms open, tears slipping unashamed down her cheeks. "Emery, baby, it's Mommy." The girl's lower lip quivered. 1-2 seconds of stillness, then the dam broke. A strangled noise escaped her throat, part gasp, part sob. She slid from the bench, blanket trailing like shed wings, and crossed the short distance in a stumbling rush. Mother and daughter collided. Mrs. Quinn wrapped her arms so tightly around Emery, it seemed she meant to graft their bones back together. The child's small hands fisted into her mother's shirt, face buried against the familiar scent she'd once called home. Her shoulders trembled silent, sobs at first, then small, shuddering cries she hadn't allowed herself during those 18 stolen days. Mr. Quinn reached them, dropping to the floor beside his wife, pulling both into a protective huddle. His eyes glistened as he pressed a shaking kiss to Emery's hair. For a long while, the room held only soft crying, the rustle of clothes, and whispered words that meant, "We're here, and you're safe, and never again." Claire remained just inside the doorway, throat thick, vision blurring despite her best discipline. She'd seen reunions before survivors reclaimed, families stitched back together, but this one felt carved from the center of everything she'd fought for. It was the thing that made sleepless nights and silenced reports somehow survivable. Yet one piece was missing. Aegis stood beside her, motionless, gaze fixed on the knot of family hugging on the floor. Claire felt his hesitation and instinct not to intrude. She knelt, whispered close to his ear, "It's okay, she knows." Then she gave a gentle click of her tongue. Aegis stepped forward. Mrs. Quinn looked up first, eyes widening. Emery followed her gaze, breath still hiccuping. The shepherd halted a respectful distance away, head slightly lowered, tail giving one tentative wag. His copper eyes held steady, patient, waiting for permission. Emery wiped at her cheeks with the back of one small hand. Her throat worked. No sound came. She stared at Aegis like seeing a dream anchored suddenly in flesh and fur. Slowly, she disengaged from her parents' embrace, crawling toward him on hands and knees until their faces were level, inches apart. Claire held her breath. Emery raised a tentative hand. Aegis didn't move. She touched the tip of his earth, the same silent signal she'd given in the screening room. As if answering an unspoken question, Aegis leaned forward and gently licked the salt trail from her cheek. A tiny, shaky smile appeared, the first Claire had ever seen from her. Then Emery spoke. Not a sentence, not even a full word at first, just a breath-soft syllable, like she was testing whether her voice still belonged to her. "Hi." Barely audible, but it echoed inside Claire's chest louder than any siren. She tried again, stronger. "Hi." The shepherd's tail wagged twice. Emery's smile broadened through tears. Behind her, Mrs. Quinn pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Mr. Quinn's shoulders shook as silent sobs became relieved laughter. Claire swallowed, eyes burning. She knelt beside Aegis, her hand resting between his shoulders. "Good boy," she whispered, voice cracking. "You brought her home." No reporters would write it. No cameras would broadcast the moment. The NDA in Claire's bag would seal these seconds behind vault doors of classified need to know. But inside this quiet room, Truth didn't need an audience. A mother's heartbeat against her child's ear. A father's arms forming the safest place on earth. A dog's steady gaze saying, "I saw you. I see you still." And a small girl finding her voice with one simple greeting. 3 weeks later, the echoes of that day at Evergreen had already begun sinking beneath the silt of classified paperwork and 24-hour news churn. The public timeline now read like a footnote. Airport security scare. No casualties. No further comment. But in a windowless conference room on the 6th floor of a Homeland campus, nobody toured. A different story was about to be acknowledged quietly, briefly, and only for those who already knew. Claire adjusted the collar of her dress uniform and checked her watch. 8:59, precisely on schedule. The room smelled of fresh paint and lemon polish, as though someone had tried to launder the history out of the walls. 2 rows of utilitarian chairs sat facing a small podium draped in navy cloth. No banner, no seal, just a state flag folded tight against a stand. Everything about the space whispered temporary. Aegis padded beside her, the shine on his K9 vest caught by the recessed lighting overhead. He looked up at her once, brown eyes steady, then resumed scanning the empty corners. It was habit now. Look, scent, catalog, protective in here, among friends. The door opened with a muted click, and Director Warren slipped in, flanked by 2 aides carrying a plain envelope and a rigid certificate frame. No press pool, no camera shutters. The aides set the frame on the podium and retreated to the wall, where they would disappear into stillness until summoned. A handful of people followed. Agent Moran, Dr. Patel from CDC, her sleeve still bearing a faint disinfectant stain. The bomb squad led Rodriguez, tie askew as though he had argued with it in the elevator. No one spoke above a murmur, voices softened by the weight of what would remain unsaid. At 9:01, Warren cleared his throat. Let's begin. The hum of the HVAC swallowed the last syllable. He didn't step onto the Dacia, merely stood beside it, envelope in hand, eyes skimming the room as if counting ghosts. 3 weeks ago, he began, an incident at Evergreen International was resolved without public harm. He paused, choosing each word like a lockpick. The official record will note the efficiency of our multi-agency response. But those of us here understand that seconds, sometimes fractions, define whether a threat stays invisible or becomes tragedy. His gaze fell on Aegis, then on Claire. Today, we recognize such a fraction. He opened the envelope, pulled free the single sheet within, and read, "In appreciation of exceptional vigilance and unwavering service, K9 Officer Aegis is hereby commended for actions that directly prevented the transport and potential deployment of unclassified biological materials at Evergreen International Airport, April the 12th. No mention of Emory, no mention of false identities or missing children or vials that still had no name. Just unclassified biological materials, a phrase that erased both the horror and the heroism but satisfied legal counsel." Warren set the page aside and lifted the framed certificate. Simple black border, embossed seal, typed commendation, and at the bottom, blank space where 2 signatures now gleamed in fresh ink. He inclined his head toward Claire. "Officer Whitlock, would you bring your partner forward?" Claire released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She gave Aegis a subtle cue. He trotted up the short ramp with practiced dignity, nails ticking softly against the wood. Warren crouched just enough to meet the dog's gaze, one hand extended not for shaking, but for honorable acknowledgement. Aegis sniffed, then remained still, stoic as a veteran. Warren laid the frame gently on the podium and offered his other hand to Claire. Their handshake was firm, swift, meant for records but not headlines. For a moment he held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. An apology for the secrecy, a thank you too heavy for words. The moment ended. An aide stepped forward, produced a small zip-top bag from his pocket, and slipped it to Warren. Genuine, high-grade beef jerky contraband, in most formal rooms, except when the guest of honor wore paws. Warren broke a strip and held it under the podium lip, away from the certificate. Aegis leaned in, teeth closing around the offered treat with surgical care. His jaw worked twice, tail giving a single, satisfied wag. A soft ripple of smiles passed through the room-tiny cracks in the bureaucratic veneer. Rodriguez let out an audible exhale, like he'd been waiting to breathe since the day of the lockdown. "Doctor." Patel dabbed at one eye with the corner of her sleeve. Claire's heart thumped in a quiet echo. She crouched beside Aegis and stroked the fur along his shoulder, while Warren spoke the closing line. Let the record show this commendation has been issued with unanimous support from each agency involved. He nodded to the aides, who began collecting chairs even before the last word settled. No applause followed, just the rustle of documents sliding into folders, the soft thud of stamp-sealing envelopes marked ease only. As the small crowd dispersed, Warren lingered. He leaned close to Claire, voice pitched for her alone. We'll keep pushing on the intel, but off the record? Without him? He glanced at Aegis. We might have learned about those vials by reading tomorrow's casualty reports. Claire's reply stuck behind her teeth, too many emotions bottlenecking for a single sentence. She managed a measured nod. Warren straightened, pulled a folded slip from his pocket, and placed it in her palm. My personal cell. If anyone tries to sideline him, or you, call me. Then he was gone. Swallowed by the corridor's sterile hush, Claire looked at the slip, then at Aegis, who was licking the last flavor of jerky from his whiskers. She slipped the paper into her breast pocket, stood, and exhaled. That's it, partner, she murmured. Show's over. Aegis tilted his head, ears perked at the familiar cadence of her voice. She reached down, fingers curling softly behind his ear, like Emery had done that day that seemed both minutes and lifetimes ago. No cameras would replay this moment. No evening anchor would call him a hero. But as Claire guided him toward the exit, certificate tucked under her arm, she realized applause wasn't the currency here. Survival was, and the silent wag of a tail. They stepped into the hallway. Fluorescent lights, polished floors, no crowds, just the echo of their footsteps moving forward. Behind them, the door clicked shut on a ceremony no one outside that building would ever know occurred. But for Claire, and for Aegis, that was enough. Justice remained hidden. The truth remained carried. And tomorrow, they would report for duty like any other day, an unseen hero, and the handler who believed in the bark that saved a world that never saw. The letter came on a Tuesday. No return address, no sender name, just a plain envelope, soft pink, with faint crayon smudges along the edges. The handwriting on the front was uneven, the loops wide and hesitant, like a child still learning how to trust her own fingers. But the name was unmistakable, spelled out in blue ink with deliberate care. For Aegis, Claire found it in her department inbox, tucked between a procurement form and a forgotten coffee memo. At first, she assumed it was misdelivered. No officer here by that name, at least not in the way the forms would understand. But when her fingers brushed the envelope, something in her chest shifted, as if a door, long sealed, opened quietly without asking. She brought it into the K9 locker room. Aegis was already there, lying in his usual spot head, resting on his front paws, ears alert but calm, watching her the way only he could, with knowing. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional click of cooling metal in the kennels. Claire sat on the bench beside him, the letter still in her hand. She remembered, she said softly. You. Aegis lifted his head, ears pricking. Claire opened the envelope slowly, as if afraid the paper inside might crumble if handled too fast. It was a single sheet, folded twice. The crayon markings returned here little hearts along the corners, a stick figure girl beside a large, blocky dog with a long tail. And then, written in large, careful print, Dear Aegis, thank you for seeing me. I didn't think anyone could. Love, Emery. Claire didn't realize she was holding her breath until she finished reading. Her eyes burned. She reached out and gently placed a hand on Aegis's head. He leaned into it, his fur warm beneath her palm, his body still and steady. A presence, a quiet anchor in a world that often refused to name its wounds. She spoke. Claire whispered half to herself. Real words. That sentence alone undid her more than she expected. After all the silence, after the shadows Emery had lived in, drugged, stolen, unnamed, the first sentence she'd chosen to say had been to him. Not to her mother, not even to Claire, who had carried the girl through rain and heat and grief. Just a word, a single syllable. Hi, directed to the one who had never needed language to understand her, who had laid beside her when she trembled, who had barked not out of command, but instinct. Claire refolded the letter carefully, hands reverent. She stood, walked over to Aegis's locker, the one with his name engraved in small brass at the top. K9 Unit Aegis. She opened the door slowly. Inside was his vest, his tracking collar, and the folded American flag they'd given her after the Denmark op was officially sealed and buried under bureaucracy. Tucked in the corner was his favorite toy, a worn blue rubber bone, chewed along one edge. Claire placed the letter in the back of the locker. Not hidden, but not on display either. Somewhere sacred, quiet, the way Aegis would have wanted. There, she murmured. Now it's home. The door clicked shut. She stayed a moment longer, her hand resting on the cool metal. It wasn't just a note, it was proof that something good had broken through. That in a world full of crossed-out names and silence stamped over innocence, someone one girl had remembered who stood beside her in the dark. Not a soldier, not an agent, just a dog who had seen her. Outside, the hallway was quiet. The shift was ending. A tired sun spilled its last gold across the tiled floor. Claire paused by the glass doors leading to the back lot. Aegis came up behind her, standing tall, still in his vest from their earlier shift. The patch read K9 Unit, but she sometimes thought it should say more. Like Savior, or Guardian, or simply enough. She turned to him, smiled. Ready to go, Officer Dog? He wagged his tail once. Just once. They walked out together into the fading light. And inside his locker, folded like a prayer and kept close to everything that mattered, a little girl's voice rested in ink and crayon. Thank you for seeing me. The house was quiet at 4 a.m. No alarms, no radio chatter, no briefing waiting on the kitchen table. But still, like clockwork, Aegis rose. One silent movement at a time, no jangle of tags, no bark to break the dark. His paws pressed gently against the cool floor, making no more noise than a thought might. He stood for a moment, body tall, ears perked, tail low but steady like a soldier waiting on orders he could still remember in his bones. Claire watched from the hallway. She hadn't meant to wake, but her body had grown attuned to him over the years. His stirrings were like a heartbeat beside her own. Even in retirement, some instincts never faded. Hers or his. She stayed where she was, leaning gently against the door frame, arms crossed in the hush, watching him pad toward the front door, sit, and wait. Just as he always had. Eyes alert, posture calm, purpose unchanged. No one was coming this morning. No convoy, no scent briefing, no explosive vest to strap on. Just a street beginning to breathe beneath a violet sky. Aegis didn't whine, didn't pace. He just waited. It wasn't habit. Not entirely. It was memory. Sometimes Claire swore he could still smell the things she could only feel. Ghosts in the air. Echoes in the silence. Maybe it was just her projecting the way grief and pride can blur, especially when wrapped in fur and loyalty. But then again, Aegis had always known things machines couldn't, things people often missed. She opened the door, just a crack. The cold met them gently, the kind of cold that held dew instead of frost, that smelled like wet earth and faraway pine. Aegis stepped out onto the porch, exhaled slow. Then he turned his head, that same head tilt, slight and precise, and looked down the street. A jogger passed. Nothing unusual. A neighbor in sweats, headphones in, moving in rhythm to a life probably untouched by the things Claire and Aegis had seen. The dog didn't flinch, just watched. Logged. Assessed. Let it go. But then came the school bus. Its brakes sighed, old and familiar, as it stopped across the street. And from the side gate of a red brick home, a little girl emerged. Backpack crooked, pigtails loose, a rainbow clip in her hair. Aegis's body shifted, not tense, but aware. Eyes narrowed just slightly. Not suspicion, memory. Claire saw it too. She felt it like a brushstroke against the heart, the way his tail lowered, then stilled, the way his gaze lingered. The girl looked both ways before crossing the lawn, but then halfway to the bus she turned, looked straight at the porch. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just looked, for a heartbeat too long, as if sensing something there that couldn't be named, something quiet and loyal and waiting. And Aegis, he didn't bark, didn't move toward her, but the look he gave her was one Claire had seen before. Back in that airport, when a girl named Emery had walked by with silence in her throat and vials in her backpack. The same pause, the same stillness, the same invisible line that drew one life toward another, not through noise, but knowing. And just like that, the girl was gone, swallowed by yellow doors and diesel hum. The bus pulled away. Aegis remained sitting for a moment more. Then, with the softest breath, he stood, padded back inside, and lay down by the window, facing the road. Claire sat beside him, gently ran her hand through the thick fur behind his ears. No words, no reassurances. They didn't need them. Aegis hadn't changed. The world had. But routine, the kind built from meaning, wasn't something he let go of easily. It wasn't about commands or treats. It was about watching, remembering, being ready if someone needed him again. Claire leaned her head back against the wall. "I know," she whispered. "Me too." In the other room, the letter from Emery sat in Aegis's locker, folded perfectly, smelling faintly of marker ink and bubblegum. It was the only thing Claire had allowed herself to reread. On hard days, on quiet mornings like this, "Thank you for seeing me." That was all it had said. 8 words from a girl who had once lived without a voice. Aegis had seen her, and he kept seeing her not in body, but in all the ones who walked by with backpacks and unsaid stories. And maybe one day, he wouldn't need to pause. Maybe one day, that part of him would heal. But not today. Today, at 4 a.m., he would rise, and he would watch the world with the heart of a protector. Because once you've saved a life, even silently, a part of you waits just in case the world ever forgets what to listen for. The office was silent, not peaceful, but oppressive. Claire sat alone, the lights above her buzzing faintly. Aegis lay curled beside the filing cabinet, not sleeping, just watching. The official case file was useless. 8 pages, no mention of the girl, no mention of the vials. Aegis was reduced to non-human canine support unit. Claire's name wasn't even there. 2 days after the ceremony, an unmarked envelope appeared. Inside, a photo, a dim storage room, silver vials in uniform rows, barcoded. Below, typed in courier font, Operation Ferryman, Project Layer 7, Biotransit. The metaphor hit hard. Ferryman, a crossing, or a theft. That night, Claire logged into restricted systems. Dug, found procurement trails buried beneath fake medical shell companies, charges for perishable organic carrier stabilization, contracts erased, names that didn't exist. At 2:37 a.m., she broke through to a buried server labeled ARC-B. A spreadsheet appeared. 12 children. Tracking IDs. Organ viability scores. One entry stopped her cold. Emery, age, 6. Status, silent carrier. Note, high cortical shielding response. Flag, resist standard sedation. Seconds later, the file blinked, then vanished. Behind her, Aegis stirred. Not alarmed, just there. Breathing slow, steady. By dawn, Claire had a name, Dr. Lyle Roan, a neurobiologist she hadn't heard of since the post-9/11's research task force. Now, he was listed as chief consultant for Ferryman. Claire didn't report what she found. She couldn't. The moment she searched the code name again, her access was revoked. Her badge flagged at 2 checkpoints. Her email emptied. Her weekly meetings canceled. Even Aegis's profile had been altered. No mention of Copenhagen. Like none of it happened. She stood on her balcony that weekend, Aegis beside her, both staring into the horizon. "If I turn this in," she whispered, "it disappears." Aegis blinked. Once, his tail thumped, quite punctuation. An unmarked envelope appeared under her door that Monday. Inside, a flash drive, 1 post. Trust what he smelled. She waited until they were home. Just her and Aegis. Fireplace lit. He dozed beside it. She plugged the drive into her air-gapped laptop. Not a file. A map. Black screen. Thin red lines. Blinking dots. Confidential Ferryman protocol. Global incidents. 27. Recovered. 1. 1 blue dot. Chicago. The rest. Red. Coordinates. Initials. Biocargo types. Cold data dressed up in silence. The blue dot. E19. Emory. Status: recovered. Agent: K9. Aegis: GS-87. Probability of canine interdiction: 93.8%. She gasped. It hadn't been luck. It had been him. She opened a surveillance file. A girl in Madrid, standing silently in customs. A teddy bear taped at the seams, eyes vacant. She didn't blink. Claire slammed the laptop shut. In the quiet, Aegis stirred. She whispered to herself, "It's okay." But it wasn't. For every Emory, there were 26 others. Lost, labeled, forgotten. She picked up the Post-it again. Trust what he smelled. It wasn't scent. It was trauma. Memory. A knowing deeper than words. Claire opened her drawer, took out the letter Emory had sent the week before. Dear Aegis, thank you for seeing me. You didn't flinch. You just stayed. I saw you too. Love, Emory. She placed the letter back in its envelope and hid it in Aegis's locker. A sacred space. A quiet shrine. She copied the drive twice, hid one in a false bottom drawer, another behind parking tickets in her glove box, then fed the original to the fire. It curled and hissed. Aegis opened his eyes. Claire looked at him. Not tonight, she whispered, and he understood. That morning, she stood before her supervisor. Mallory didn't sugarcoat it. You need to drop this. Claire didn't blink. The evidence doesn't drop just because we look away. Mallory leaned back. You and that dog saved a child. But if you keep digging, you'll lose your badge, and your file will be sealed. Claire asked, You ever leave the most important part out of a report? Mallory didn't deny it. That's the job. That night, Claire wrote her own report. Not for approval, for truth, timestamps, erased footage, the map, the vials. She encrypted it, labeled it. In case. She stored it in the fireproof box under the floor, the one that once held Aegis's puppy vaccination card. She messaged a contact, someone who owed her from a case 2 years back. Need to talk. Off record. Child trafficking. Medical. Ferryman. Do you know it? Then she waited. Across the room, Aegis lifted his head. Claire smiled softly. Still up? He blinked once, rested his chin again. It was enough. She reached for one last envelope, handwritten, to Aegis. Thank you for seeing me, Emory. She hadn't opened it. Not yet. Maybe she never would. Because sometimes, all you need is to know you were seen and remembered. Message. Need to talk. Off record. Urgent. Child trafficking. Per M. Ethical. Ferryman. Do you know it? She hit send. And then, she waited. Not for permission, not for clearance. For the next move. Because justice wasn't a courtroom. Sometimes, it was a dog that waited at the door at 4 a.m. Sometimes, it was a quiet report saved under a floorboard. And sometimes, it was a woman who refused to forget what others buried, even if no one ever saw her do it. Before he was Officer Aegis, he was just a young German shepherd in training unit, 14 black saddleback, oversized ears, and eyes that unnerved even seasoned handlers. He didn't just follow commands. He watched, calculated. Not the treat, not the toy, but people, their hands, their faces, the twitch in a jaw. Over-attentive, one trainer wrote. Distracted, possibly unfit. But Claire saw something else. Something precise, intentional. She first met him alone in the kennels. No barking, no wagging, just stillness. A kind of quiet tension that mirrored her own. When she offered her hand, he didn't sniff, just hovered close, then leaned back again, measured, curious, present. Claire requested to be his handler. They told her no, offered her a Labrador named Milo instead. She refused. Eventually, they relented. From the first day, they worked like breath and body. Aegis didn't just track scents. He read the terrain, paused at cigarette butts, slowed at torn threads. During rescue drills, he approached child actors with astonishing gentleness. Once, a boy burst into tears under a cardboard pile. Aegis didn't bark or paw. He lay beside him, quiet, waiting. The child later whispered, "He didn't feel like part of the game." Claire never forgot. During gas mask drills, when Claire fumbled, Aegis shoved her under a tarp before the instructor even reacted. It wasn't just training, it was instinct. or something older than that. Though his obedience scores were high, his behavioral evaluations raised flags. Inconsistent, they said. He's not inconsistent, Claire told them. He's conscious. They warned her not to humanize him, but Claire wasn't. She simply saw what others didn't, a dog that felt, noticed, chose. When deployment orders came, she asked for him again. No resistance. He was hers now, not by form, but by bond. And then came Emery. Claire barely remembers what she was doing that day. Paperwork, maybe. But Aegis froze mid-stride, head tilted, ears twitching toward a corner of the waiting room. Behind a fake plant, a small girl curled into herself. Silent. Invisible. No one else noticed, but Aegis did. He approached gently and sat not close enough to frighten, not far enough to abandon. Emery didn't move, then just barely reached out. Her fingertip brushed his ear. Not a pet, not a stroke, just contact. Like a ghost. And Aegis closed his eyes, exhaled, and stayed still. Claire watched, breath held. Later, she reviewed security footage, froze that frame, printed it, slipped it into Aegis's locker. Not for evidence, but for memory. That moment saved Emery. Not with force, but with presence. No one else had seen the flick of her eyes toward the door, the micro-lean, before she recoiled again. But Aegis did. And more than that, he understood. Dogs see what humans dismiss, Claire's old mentor once said. She hadn't believed him. Until then, Aegis always sensed the quiet things, the silences, the flickers of fear too small for cameras or algorithms. He would glance at Claire before entering a room, not asking permission, but offering, "Are we ready for what's behind that door?" Even after the remodel, the bulletin board gone, the plant replaced, he always paused at that same spot. Claire knelt beside him once, whispering, "You saw her. Before we did." He leaned into her palm. Not for affection, just acknowledgement. They called it instinct in the reports. But Claire never tried to define it. Some truths unravel under words. Instead, she let it shape their rituals. The way she brushed his fur longer behind the ears. The way she waited before deployments. The way she learned to listen not just with ears, but skin and silence. Because there is something profoundly human buried in a good dog's gaze. And Aegis, he stood in that space, between trauma and trust. Then came the tech lab, sterile, bright, airtight with tension. Across from her sat August Wolf, analyst, young, drained. The vial, he said, had no signature, no tag, polymer shell, nanolocked. Our scanners didn't catch a thing. Claire didn't blink, but Aegis did. August blinked. "You mean the dog?" "He's not just a dog," she said. They tested the child. No stress signs, no odd movements, no behavioral flags. But he reacted, Claire explained. Not when she touched the backpack. Earlier, when she adjusted her sleeve. Stillness. That's all he gave, but it was enough. They used her, Claire said, because no machine would see a 7-year-old girl as a threat. But Aegis did, August murmured. Not from scent, not behavior. Something else. That's what I've been trying to tell them. He showed her the AI metrics, cold data that had missed everything. Whatever that vial was, it's off the books. Samples gone. Claire said nothing. Anger coiled in her ribs. He didn't just detect it, August whispered. He shielded her. Claire nodded. Because he knew. As she stood to leave, the vial rotated on the screen behind her, a perfect weapon disguised as mercy. She whispered, "What kind of world builds weapons to look like children?" No answer. Back at the precinct, Aegis lay by the door, listening, waiting. Because some hearts don't need orders, they just know. The building had long emptied, just the hum of servers in the next room, and the occasional flicker of hallway lights. Claire sat at her desk with the lamp dimmed low, elbows resting on the wood, hands loosely holding a warm mug of stale coffee. Outside the window, the city blinked, disinterested. Another night, another set of unfiled truths. Aegis lay near the doorway, not asleep, not fully alert either, that in-between state he always seemed to default to when Claire was working late. His ears occasionally twitched, but his eyes were open. Watching. Always watching. Claire looked over at him. "You know it's past midnight, right?" she said softly. He just didn't move. He didn't have to. He was there in that quiet, unshakable way of his. She pushed back from her desk slowly, the chair giving a tired creak, and made her way over to him. Her boots didn't echo. Years in the field had taught her how to move like water. She lowered herself to the ground beside him, knees cracking in protest. The air felt colder here, or maybe that was just the weight in her chest finally settling. Claire ran her hand gently along his back, pausing when her fingers brushed the old scar near his right flank, a scar no one asked about anymore. The kind of mark that didn't show up in official reports, but stayed stitched into memory. "You saved her," she whispered, her voice caught between reverence and exhaustion. "No protocol could have told you that. No training simulation, no sensor alert." Aegis shifted slightly, enough to press his head against her thigh, his version of saying, "I know. But I didn't do it for thanks." Claire gave a breath of a laugh, thin and fragile. She looked out the window again. "No one will ever know what you did." The words weren't bitter. They weren't sad either. They were just true. There would be no medal, no news story, no footnote in an internal memo. Emery's family didn't even know the full extent. And they couldn't. Because if they knew the vial was real, if they knew the extent of what had been intercepted, the silence would crack and the whole buried truth of Operation Ferryman would start to surface. It was safer, they said, to let the official story die a quiet death. But Claire remembered, and Aegis remembered. And maybe, in some small way, that was enough. "You're the only one I trust now," she said, reaching over to scratch behind his ear. His tail gave a soft thump against the floor once. Not out of joy, out of acknowledgement. In a world of redacted files and vanishing names, Aegis had never changed. He still woke at 4 a.m., still paused when a child with a backpack walked by, still leaned into her when the silence got too heavy, still understood her, without needing her to explain. "You know what scares me?" she asked, voice lower now, as if afraid the darkness might be listening. "I think they're going to let it happen again, somewhere else. Another kid, another courier." "Oh." Aegis didn't react, not visibly, but his body tensed slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if even the idea offended something primal in him. Loyalty, perhaps? Or justice? Claire leaned back against the wall, legs stretched out in front of her now. Her hand dropped to Aegis's shoulder, resting there as if it were the one stable thing in a shifting world. "When I was a rookie," she said quietly, "they told me not to get attached, that dogs rotate handlers, that it's better not to name them, not to humanize them. I didn't listen, and I'm glad I didn't." A long pause. "You weren't just a tool, Aegis. You weren't just trained. You chose to stay when everyone else ran. You saw what no one else would look for, and you protected her like she was your own." Aegis exhaled slowly through his nose, not quite a sigh, more a soft release of breath, as if the emotion passed through him but didn't linger. Claire looked down at him, her eyes glassy now. "I wish I could tell the world. I wish there was a stage big enough for what you did, for who you are." Aegis leaned into her side more fully, the warmth of him grounding her. He didn't need praise. He didn't need words. He just needed to be close. And in that moment, Claire realized, this right here was his version of a hug. She rested her forehead against his. "I won't let it disappear. I'll keep it alive. Quietly. I'll write it down, hide it where I have to, but I won't forget." The hum of the building seemed to still. Somewhere in the distance, the wind scratched against the glass, like fingernails reminding them that time still moved forward, even when hearts wanted to stay. Claire closed her eyes and stayed there a while longer, one hand curled gently into the thick fur at Aegis's neck. And though no one else would ever know, though the cameras would never show, the records never file, there was something sacred in that silence. A kind of unspoken truth between one woman and one dog who understood that doing the right thing didn't always come with a spotlight. Sometimes it only came with a lean of the body, a breath shared in stillness, and the trust that neither of them would ever let the other be forgotten. The new handler stepped into the K9 unit with boots too clean and eyes that hadn't yet learned to look for what wasn't there. His name was Jeremy Nash, 28, ex-Army MP. Good file, good heart, too eager to prove both. Claire watched him from the hallway as he stood in front of his assigned dog's kennel. The pup, barely 2 years old, was a German Shepherd mix named Lancer. Lancer didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply stared back, ears alert, tail low, testing, as all of them did. Sometimes they wait to see who blinks first, Claire said, her voice carrying into the quiet room like the scrape of soft gravel. Jeremy turned. Agent Harrow. He nodded respectfully. I read your reports. The case at O'Hare, what Aegis did. It's incredible. Claire's lips curved, but it wasn't quite a smile. It wasn't in the reports. Jeremy blinked. Ma'am? She stepped closer, resting a hand on the metal bars of the empty kennel beside Lancer's. The tag had been removed. Only the faint outline of the name remained. Aegis. She traced the ghost of it with her thumb. They'll tell you dogs operate on training, routine, reward systems, she said. That behavior is just stimulus and response. But sometimes it's more. Sometimes they see what we don't, not with their eyes, but something older, deeper. Jeremy glanced at Lancer. The dog had sat down, head tilted slightly, watching Claire with interest. He's been quiet, Jeremy admitted. Not aggressive, just withholding. Give him time, Claire said, and space. But when he looks at something like it doesn't belong, even if you don't see it, don't ignore it. Jeremy nodded slowly. I've been told to trust the training. Claire's gaze held him. Trust the dog. Silence stretched between them, filled with distant footsteps and the hum of lights overhead. Claire finally stepped back from the kennel. Why did you stay? Jeremy asked. After everything? She looked at him, and for a moment, the fluorescent ceiling lights caught the edge of something quiet and worn behind her eyes. Because someone has to tell the next ones how to listen. Jeremy hesitated. You mean to the dogs? Claire nodded. Especially to the dogs. They stood together in the stillness, Lancer shifting just slightly, as if his ears were tuning into a different frequency one humans couldn't hear. But some hearts could feel. You'll want to take him out to the north field in the mornings, Claire added. The shadows are long there. Easier for him to track scent trails. Jeremy opened the kennel door slowly. Lancer rose, calm but cautious, stepping forward. Claire knelt as Lancer passed her, one hand brushing his shoulder gently. The texture was different, not Aegis. Lancer was leaner, younger, more hesitant. But there was something in the way. He paused at her touch, something still forming. They'll tell you to watch his body language, Claire murmured. But watch his silences more. It's the quiet dogs who carry the weight. Jeremy clicked the lead to Lancer's collar and stood. I'll remember that. As they left, Claire remained. Alone now. She looked back at the empty kennel, the one she hadn't let them reassign. Not yet. Maybe not ever. On the back wall of the training office, next to the certificates and commendations, was a small black and white photograph. Aegis. His ears forward, nose slightly lifted, as if already sensing something beyond the frame. Beneath it, a plaque read, He didn't follow orders. He followed truth. Claire closed her eyes for a second. The kind of blink that wasn't about fatigue but memory. Later that evening, she sat alone in the break room, sipping lukewarm coffee, staring out the small window that overlooked the edge of the training field. The moon had begun its rise, throwing a silver sheen across the grass. She saw Jeremy walking Lancer slowly. No commands, just pacing beside each other, like two people trying to learn the same language. A soft rustle by her side broke her thoughts. It was Margot, the senior veterinary liaison, setting down a small envelope on the table beside Claire. They found this tucked in the corner of Aegis's last locker. It's addressed to you. Claire stared at the envelope. No handwriting. Just her name printed on the label. She opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a photograph. Not official, not staged. It showed Claire sitting cross-legged in the field with Aegis lying beside her, his head on her knee. She wasn't looking at the camera, she was laughing, hair windblown, one hand mid-motion as if telling a story. On the back, scribbled in an old blue pen, was a single line. Don't forget he trusted you first. Claire pressed the photo to her chest. Not for warmth, for gravity, for weight. She thought about all the nights she had wondered if she'd made a difference. If one dog's instinct was enough to change anything. If anyone would remember. She looked out again at the field. Jeremy had knelt down. Lancer was sitting across from him, tail brushing the grass, head tilted, listening. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that's how legacy worked. Not in headlines, but in one handler stopping, one dog listening, and one lesson whispered across time: trust him anyway. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the frame went up. No announcement, no ceremony, just a soft rustle of brown paper being peeled away and the muted click of a nail settling into drywall. Claire stood back, alone in the hallway just outside the K9 unit's break room, looking at it for the first time since it had arrived in a plain envelope. No return address. Just a single name scrawled on the back in purple marker. For Officer Claire and Aegis. And the drawing was unmistakably the work of a child. Lines, a little crooked, proportions off in all the charming ways innocence allows. Aegis's ears were huge, towering like satellite dishes. His paws were circles, oddly shaped and a little too big. But his eyes, bright blue, full of life, and something deeper, something like knowing, like listening. Claire didn't remember ever seeing Emery use blue crayons in the safe house. But somehow the girl had chosen it for Aegis's eyes. Beneath the sketch, written in careful, slightly trembling print, "This is the dog that hurt me." Claire exhaled a slow, steady breath. She hadn't cried in weeks. Not since the night after the press conference, when the FBI declared the incident contained and the lab data undisclosed for security reasons. The public didn't need to know what had almost happened. They'd never know how close it had been. But Claire remembered. And she knew the one who remembered more. She knelt slightly, as if to meet Aegis's drawn eyes on their level. In the silence, she could almost hear the echo of Emery's voices, soft, hesitant, a whisper threaded with relief. He knew, before anyone, he knew. That moment in the terminal kept replaying. The way Aegis had braced himself in front of the girl, not out of aggression, but insistence. The way he'd barked, not once, but 3 times. Precise, alert, certain. Even when Claire hadn't yet seen the threat. Even when every machine, every protocol, every damn piece of equipment failed to blink. Aegis hadn't, and Emery had known too, in her own quiet way. She'd reached out, trembling, and touched the inside of his ear gentle, like a child checking to see if something is real. That was all it had taken, just that. A moment no adult noticed, no sensor logged. But he had. Claire's throat tightened. She stood slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame oak wood, simple but warm to the touch. Officer Ramirez from maintenance had made it himself after overhearing her talk about the drawing. Said nothing, just left it on her desk with a sticky note. Some things deserve to be remembered properly. By lunchtime, others had paused by the frame. One of the rookie techs stopped in front of it, staring for a full minute before whispering, "That's him, huh?" Another handler had brought his coffee there, leaning against the wall like it was a memorial. But it wasn't. Not really. It was a promise. Aegis sat a few feet away from Claire, head resting between his paws, tail curled close, eyes blinking slowly. She knelt beside him and ran her hand along the fur at the base of his neck, that one spot where the hair always stood up when he sensed unease. She still didn't know how he did it. Maybe she never would. "Kid got your ears wrong," she murmured softly. "But the eyes," she nailed those. Aegis didn't move much, just leaned a little into her palm. His way of answering, his version of, "I know." Claire looked up again at the drawing. "You heard her. Before anyone else. Before even I could." She thought of all the cases filed away under names and numbers. The ones with no drawings, no framed captions, no survivors. 27, only one ever intercepted. That reality used to crush her, but not today. Today there was color on the wall. Blue, purple, yellow Emery had drawn a sun in the corner, as if light had always belonged near Aegis. And the caption. God, the caption. "This is the dog that hurt me." Claire didn't need medals or press briefings. She didn't need commendations buried beneath redacted files. All she needed was that wall and a crayon-drawn version of a partner who never failed to listen. And somewhere out there, she hoped no, she believed Emery was smiling again. Maybe she was safe now. Drawing horses, or clouds, or the way her mom's hair looked in sunlight. But one day, if someone ever asked her who saved her that day, she'd point not to Claire or the FBI. She'd point to a dog, one with ears too big, eyes too blue, and a stillness that spoke louder than alarms. And that was more than enough. Sometimes, the quietest stories stay with us the longest. A look, a nudge, a moment when a dog without needing words simply knows. That's what German Shepherds give us. Not just protection, but presence. Not just service, but soul. Aegis was never just a working dog. He was a listener, a guardian, a gentle truth teller in a world that often overlooks the quiet. And maybe that's what we need more of, beings who see us without needing to ask anything back. If you've ever looked into your own dog's eyes and felt something stir that silent trust, that steady loyalty you already understand. And if you're looking to deepen that bond, or just honor the quiet connection you share, there are some beautiful resources out there. I found one recently that really touched me. It's not about commands or tricks, but understanding your dog like family. I'll leave the link below if your heart nudges you toward it. Thanks for being here, for loving dogs the way they deserve to be loved, and for believing, like I do, that sometimes the ones who say the least carry the most.